It's a web of intrigue that starts in our Holy of Holies, Boys Town, Nebraska, one of the most respected institutions in the United States, and spreads out like a spider web to Washington, D.C., right up to the steps of the nation's capital, the steps of the White House, involves some of the most respected and powerful and richest businessmen in this United States of America. And the centerpiece of the entire web is the use of children for sex and drug dealing and drug couriers, the compromising of politicians, the compromising of businessmen, but worst of all, the corruption of key institutions of government that have the duty and responsibility to make sure these things never happen.
So we'll wing it. We'll do it live.
It's fine. It's totally fine.
Fuck it. We'll do it live.
You know, there are some people out there that still don't know what that reference is.
Still don't.
But you know what? Okay, so Paranormal Caught on Tape has taken a dive. Where's Ben Kissel?
Oh, is he not in?
He's not even on it anymore.
Yuck. What is that? It's useless now.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's really awful. But, you know, we all have to live through some tough times.
Yes, and that is your tough time.
Oh, yes, such a tough time. I'm living through Ben Kissel being off Paranormal Caught on Tape. Ben Kissel, if you're out there. What's up? That's it.
What's up?
That's it. Okay. Hey, everybody. It's Creep It Real. I'm Ashley.
I'm Bianca.
And you're listening to us on Creep It Real, the podcast.
God, every time.
So, how are you?
I'm good.
Oh.
I got contacts today for the
Oh.
first time in my whole life.
Wow.
So I'm really pumped about it. It is a life-changing, life-altering experience.
Wow.
I'm really excited about them.
That's about the nerdiest update you could have given me, but I will say I'm excited to just go to make the first steps to get glasses.
Yeah. Oh, are
be
you? Do you have an appointment?
No, but I'm going to have one. I am. I'm making one sometime when I take off those days. I'm going to take off.
Dude, once you can see clearly, your life is legit gonna change. Have you ever worn glasses? Oh my God, Ashley.
I know.
Ashley,
And, like,
your life is gonna change.
And for years throughout my life, for the past ever, at night, I'm like, well, what's going on? I think I have an idea.
You're like, looks like that's a green light. I don't.
I can see the basics. Like, I can see the color, but unfortunately, instead of it just being a circle, it's an explosion of green. So it's like a firework of.
Dude, everything is going to be so
lights.
crisp for you.
Oh,
you
God.
need it.
I know. I really do. It's
You do.
unsafe. I know.
You and I should get married so you can come onto my insurance plan.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds like a plan.
Okay.
All right.
That might be insurance fraud, but that's fine.
I mean, who gets to determine what constitutes a marriage?
True.
I guess
That's true. Society.
I guess society, but you know, there's a lot of interesting arrangements out there,
True.
edible and otherwise. Okay. All right. A little over 2 years ago, Creep It Real covered Omaha's Franklin Credit Union cover-up. Some people want to call it a hoax. Some people want to call it a scandal. I call it a scandal, but it's like the truest scandal that ever lived. It is a scandal in which a disgusting child sex and drug trafficking ring was exposed, filled with clientele who were prominent figures in cities all over America. Who even really knows how far up it goes, is what basically everyone involved in the investigation said. This situation was only taken even slightly seriously and uncovered to those that cared because an investigation into Larry King, who ran a credit union in Omaha, Nebraska, exposed that he had stolen millions of dollars from the bank.
So it only counts when there's money that's been
otherwise-
stolen from an institution.
Otherwise, it doesn't matter if every high-powered man in America is raping children.
Oh, kind of like what's going on
Yes.
right now, like Jeffrey. Okay, that's fine.
Very pertinent. So this, despite the fact that many different agencies over the years had attempted to expose the child abuse going on with many of these people, it was ignored by essentially every single law enforcement agency it was brought to. But why could ever that be? I think we have some idea. Those episodes have become some of our most popular, and we periodically get emails or messages about the case with people inevitably wondering if it could possibly be true. Which, I mean, if you listened, I think you have to know.
We think it is true.
I have no doubt in my mind.
Right.
If anything, how things have developed in the past few years regarding sex trafficking, and now with Jeffrey Epstein, as Bianca just mentioned, who we know had connections with very, very prominent figures, such as Bill Clinton, as if that surprises anyone. Mm-mm. But Epstein is a whole grotesque situation unto itself that we will one day, I'm sure, look into when there may be possibly some information about it that doesn't get destroyed.
Right.
But for now, it's worth noting that circumstances that have been uncovered with him, such as the way he found young girls to molest and abuse, with the aid of quote-unquote scouts like Ghislaine Maxwell and other young girls, just like how in Franklin they had not only the foster care system that they were working kids through, but the kids themselves would act as scouts for the quote-unquote recruits, which is something that we talked about in our Patreon episode about Johnny Gosh, where Paul Benassi, who has been spoken about on this podcast many times, said that he was tasked with scouting out new kids to help collect them for these fucking perverts. So anyway, we always meant to do a part 3. Obviously, it's 2 years later, so it's a little bit of time has elapsed, and I think it would be good to just redo the whole thing. And we're gonna bring this to you as a series that we were gonna come around to now and again. Creep It Real, Resurrected.
Ooh.
And today we bring you the Franklin Cover-Up, part 3. No, really, burn it all to the fucking ground.
Before we get into it, we just wanted to preface our sources. I found a book called The Franklin Scandal, a story of power brokers, child abuse, and betrayal by Nick Bryant, who started pursuing Jeffrey Epstein in 2012 after writing this book. And we both reread The Franklin Cover-Up, Child Abuse, Satanism, and Murder in Nebraska by John DeCamp, along with a number of articles that we'll list in the show notes.
I will remember, I promise. Sometimes there are forces and events too big, too powerful, with so much at stake for other people or institutions that you cannot do anything about them, no matter how evil or wrong they are, no matter how dedicated or sincere you are, or how much evidence that you have. That is a quote by former CIA Director William Colby to John DeCamp, who began the investigation into the Franklin Credit Union and sex trafficking ring. That's clearly a bleak
outlook.
That's bleak as fuck.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
Unfortunately, that's coming from somebody who knows about the matter,
yes.
I think.
This CIA director, I'm sure he's got some knowledge.
It really makes you... It really drives home that, like, this is not something that's new, nor is it something that is a secret to the elite members of society, I guess, because it's been covered up for the people that do it by the other people that are in that same group. And who knows, actually, like we talked about maybe last episode when I was saying that it's absolutely a phenomenon going on in relation to power and sex abuse of children. There's something that ties the two together almost inexplicably, intrinsically is what I was thinking. They seem to go together hand in hand. I'm sure there are some powerful people out there that don't rape kids, but it seems like there's way more that do, or there's more than I would ever care to believe that do, unfortunately. DeCamp stated that if the cover-up into the sex abuse, the sex ring, is legitimate, which he fully believed it was, that it would include key institutions of government, from courts to police to the highest level politicians, the media, and obviously the wealthiest business leaders who we all aren't the biggest fans of anyway. The information we are sharing is evidence that has been gathered that was gathered for the Nebraska Legislature's Special Committee of the Franklin case, which found and verified the tracks of criminal activity where law enforcement purported to see absolutely none, some fucking how. And I'm already pissed.
I know, so am I.
My face is hot.
So Nick Bryant had mentioned initially that the reason he's even started digging into the whole Franklin situation was because his editor that he was working for was looking for some, quote, very dark stories in about 2002.
I know the feeling.
He pitched some ideas to his editor about Nazism and Satanism, and Satanism was the one that stuck. His plan was essentially to get in good with Satanists and try to attend a black mass. And I think we should definitely do a satanic panic type of episode just to kind of go over this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But he did say that the Satanists that he came across were either highly intelligent or super dumb.
Hey, I think I might have encountered this myself. And contrary to popular belief, we're not satanic.
No.
But that's only because, not because I think it's so evil, but only because it's just as silly as anything else.
Another thing he noticed was that a lot of Satanists were also Republican. It's not an anti-Republican statement, but Nick did talk about how ironic it was that Satanists and fundies generally share the same political affiliations.
It's definitely weird.
It's strange. I wonder what it is about that.
I hate to say it. I mean, but it's like a libertarian type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm telling you, it really is. I know there's like different sects of libertarian, but most libertarians, and I don't know if I'll keep this in or not, but most libertarians are super conservative, and they just are taking on a different name to try to separate themselves from the Republican Party. But it's really the same thing, probably worse, with less power.
Nick was eventually invited to a black mass, which, again, like the fundamentalist thing, it takes a note from Roman Catholic Mass.
Oh, God, our Father.
Yeah. All in Latin. But after the person who invited him insisted he partake of the host, which contained the high priest's semen, and the high priestess's menstruation, he politely declined. No, thank you.
That's something. That's a good acquired taste.
This led him to troll online for stories about Satanism, and the internet was, of course, filled with stories of Satanists abducting children, but also stories about the connections between Satanists and the CIA, and eventually he came across a cult called the Finders. This cult wasn't rooted in paranoia like many of the conspiracy theories we find today, but rather in a U.S. Customs report written by a Special Agent Ramon Martinez, and was as follows. On February 4th, 1987, a concerned citizen notified the Tallahassee Police Department that he had observed 6 white children, poorly dressed, bruised, dirty, and behaving like wild animals in the park, accompanied by 2 well-dressed white males, who were later identified as Douglas Ammerman and James Michael Halwell, driving a 1979 Dodge van with Virginia plates. The police responded to the call and took the children and adults into custody. The adults refused to cooperate, and one of them produced a business card that stated he planned to exercise his constitutional right to remain silent. So...
Okay. He just carries it around.
He just carries it around with him just in case.
Sorry, I just read the next.
Police noticed that the children, who were between 3 and 6, could not identify themselves or their guardians, and were unaware of the function and purpose of telephones, televisions, and toilets.
What year was this now?
This was in 1987.
Toilets? Oh, gosh. You know, I gotta say, it's kind of reminding me of a little bit of the Jalik Rainwalker story where he got sent to a foster home. I don't know what's happening here, to be honest, but he got sent to a foster home that had no running water or toilets or anything like that in 2016 or something. What is this? What is this?
Story?
I guess they treat children like animals, is what essentially. Like goods.
What's going on right now,
Yeah, okay, sorry. I'm having a realization and talking it out with everyone.
The children said they were not allowed to live indoors and they were given food only as a reward.
Dude, I'm sorry, I didn't even read.
That's totally fine.
Okay.
While in custody, over 500 calls came in from mothers that were looking for their children because this came out in the newspaper.
Oh my God.
A doctor examined the children and determined 2 of the 6 of them to have physical indicators of sexual abuse. The doctor also found bite marks, although he could not determine if the bite was from a child or an adult, and a behavioral scientist indicated that the children behaved similarly to those who had been institutionalized for a prolonged period.
Oh.
When the children were placed into protective custody, a series of disturbing violent phone calls were made to the Child Protective Agency threatening bombing and other violence.
Oh.
So, the police charged the 2 adults with felony child abuse, and they were held on a $100,000 bond, and the children were placed in protective custody. Police found documents in the van that allowed them to ID the adults and sort of ID the children, and they also found documents containing 2 Washington, D.C. addresses.
Washington, D.C., man.
The police now suspected child pornography and contacted the U.S. Customs Service, which has a child porn and protection unit, which is so sad that there is a child pornography and protection unit that is a part of our government.
Yeah.
Detective James Bradley of the Washington, D.C. Metro Police Department contacted Special Agent Ramon Martinez of the USCS and indicated that the arrests in Tallahassee were probably linked to a case he was investigating in the D.C. area involving the Finders, who operated various businesses out of a warehouse in D.C. and housed children at a second warehouse.
What is this, the fucking U.S. government in 2020?
The information was specific in describing blood rituals and sexual orgies involving children. The arrests were what Bradley needed for warrants to be executed in order to search the two warehouses, and in February they did this search. In the first warehouse, they found jars of feces and urine and a room with several computers and a cache of documents. Martinez wrote, "Cursory examination of the documents revealed detailed instructions for obtaining children for unspecified purposes. The instructions included the impregnation of female members of the Finders, purchasing children, trading, and kidnapping. There were telex messages using MCI account numbers between a computer terminal believed to be located in the same room and others located across the country in foreign locations. One telex specifically ordered the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged through the contact in the Chinese embassy."
Great.
So
Great.
we're doing this internationally.
And through the embassy, no doubt, no less, yeah.
The investigators also discovered documents that discussed bank secrecy, high-tech transfers, terrorism, and explosives. They even found a detailed summary of the events surrounding the areas the previous night with instructions that advised, quote, participants to move the children through different police jurisdictions and instructions on how to avoid police detection. In addition to the urine, feces, and creepy computer shit, Martinez also found a large collection of photographs of nude children, one which appeared to be a child on display in a way that accented the child's genitals.
I seriously want to murder everyone.
Then an officer presented Martinez with a photo album that contained photos of adults and children dressed in white sheets slaughtering 2 goats that portrayed the slaughter, disembowelment, skinning, and dismemberment of the goats by the children. Additionally, the photos showed the removal of the male goat's testes and removal of baby goats from inside the female goat's womb and the presentation of a goat's head to one of the children.
Fuck my life.
There were intel files on families not related to the Finders, and they seem to have had a systematic response to local newspaper ads for babysitters, tutors, etc. And a member of the Finders would respond and gather as much information as possible about the habits, identity, occupation, etc. of the family. Additionally, there was a large amount of data collected on child care organizations. About a month after the warrant was executed, Martinez set an appointment with Detective Bradley, but when he arrived to their appointment, Bradley was unavailable, and he had to speak to a third party who was willing to discuss the Finders' situation off the record.
Why off the record?
Right. The third party let him know that this had now become an internal CIA matter, and the report was classified as secret and unavailable for review.
We have CIA members that are diddling children.
Yep. So this is great.
So that's why we can't let you look at this stuff.
The FBI had been withdrawn several weeks prior, and counterintelligence had directed MPD, which was the Washington, D.C. Municipal Police Department, not to advise the FBI field office about anything. Additionally, the Finders were being investigated for the transportation of children across state lines for immoral purposes or kidnapping. And weirdly, after the CIA intervention, Chief Turner, in a press conference, backpedaled the claims that they had made regarding the satanic rituals or child abuse. He called the Finders a communal group, and he didn't mention that they also had an interest in purchasing children, trading and kidnapping them, and definitely omitted the jars of feces and urine they found in the warehouses. After the press conference, the FBI said that their investigation of the Finders was winding down because the Bureau had not particularly uncovered any evidence of federal violations.
Oh, okay.
The Finders, specifically the biological mothers of the children found in Florida, who traveled to speak with investigators, gave explanations that apparently satisfied law enforcement. According to police reports, the mothers said that in late December, the men in the group took the children to Kentucky, where they would work a construction job, while the women went to California for temporary work. When the men arrived for the project, however, They found that it was at a standstill and instead told the woman that they would take the children on an adventure to Florida. According to the documents, the mothers understood why police would be asking questions and agreed that the men had handled the situation poorly by lying about Mexico. But they also insisted they had nothing to hide. But why lie? Mm-hmm. They denied being Satanists and explained the photo of the slaughtered goat, saying that it was similar to a biology class. And that was part of the lesson for the children on where meat comes from.
Oh, my word. I doubt that.
They insisted that the children were all well fed, and they completely disbelieved any allegations that the men with their children could have committed sexual abuse.
Wait a second. So the children were supposedly going to work this construction job?
They were going with the men to
just going with them
on an adventure.
Okay.
And there was a report on these children, and one of them had eaten like 8 bananas and 2 apples while he was being detained. And
I'm sure he was well fed.
Yeah, super well fed. Mm-hmm. The adults with those kids had their felony abuse charges reduced to misdemeanors, and 6 weeks later they were dropped altogether, and the children were eventually returned to them. About 7 years later, the USCS report was leaked to the media. And in December of 1993, an article discussed the efforts of Democratic Representative Charlie Rose and Republican Tom Lewis to expose the government's ties to the Finders. Lewis asked in the article, could our own government have had something to do with the Finders organization and turn their backs on these children?
Yes.
That's what all the evidence points to, and there is a lot of evidence. I can tell you this. We've got a lot of people scrambling, and that wouldn't be happening if there was nothing here.
Truth.
And then in search of an answer to the question, why would 2 men in their 20s take kids to Florida to explore? And in the age of conspiracy theories about high-profile government figures involved in sexual abuse, Wayfair, Pizzagate, adrenochrome, list goes on, the Finders laid out the foundation for the plethora of questions the general public had and has regarding what in the absolute fuck was U.S. intelligence covering up regarding sexual abuse in the 80s? And what in the fuck are they covering up today?
Yeah, it's pretty glaring. You know,
it's very glaringly obvious that something is being covered up. And I don't mean to put on a tinfoil hat,
no,
but
you can't even, in my opinion, you can't even pretend like this is something that is a conspiracy anymore.
No, because look what's going on with Jeff Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. It's like a running joke. Ghislaine's gonna have COVID and die.
Right.
She's gonna commit suicide or be suicided. You know, it's like a running joke.
I mean, and for fuck's sake, just listen to this episode and everything that goes on with the Franklin investigation, and you cannot deny that something was going on here. There's corruption in every single level. It is so frustrating. So, we're going to talk about some more ways that these rings were going on, how they were able to work in society without people knowing about it. And it definitely happens. And and here, I mean, it's like in anything like this, you have to see the things that in every circumstance are kind of similar. The way that these rings and the sex trafficking works is there's similar characteristics to all of them, and it's kind of like everything else in the world. It's like nothing fucking changes, man.
The cycle completely repeats. I was watching the Jeff Epstein docuseries today, and it's the same fucking cycle as it was for Franklin. He had people working for him, scouting kids to, Jeff Epstein, massage him. Larry King to provide at parties. Like, it's the same thing with the same kind of people doing the same exact thing.
That's because it's never stopped happening, and it never, and it always was happening. And you know, we'll see. Well, as we hear, we'll hear it. So, okay, let's go back to June 10th, 1985. When Washington County, Nebraska Sheriff's Department contacted a Nebraska Department of Social Services social worker regarding the MacArthur children who were living in foster care with Jarrett and Barbara Webb. They said that they had the children in custody due to an abuse complaint, and the children had been saying that they were beat with a railroad iron and belt, and that the abuse had been happening for a while, but because they were afraid to report it, they just stayed in the home. Jarrett Webb had worked for 10 years at the Omaha Public Power District and was a board member of the Franklin Community Federal Credit Union. Barbara Webb, his wife, was Larry King's cousin. And we'll get into Larry King here in a bit. But Larry King is pretty much the central figure of this Franklin Credit Union story. By no means is he the only figure.
No.
The Webb's foster child, Sean MacArthur, and adopted son Joey Patterson were removed from the Webbs' custody. That month, other foster and adopted children of the Webbs, there were up to 9 in their home at one time, had tried to make their break all alone or in pairs. On multiple occasions, these kids were trying to run away from the house, which says something, I would think.
Yeah.
In August, Joey's sister Kimberly Patterson Webb, who was 14, and her brother Michael ran away, but they were returned to the Webbs by the police.
Perfect.
In November, Nellie Patterson Webb, who was 16, fled the home to her grandmother's named Ruby. And DSS reported on December 18th, 1985, that their office interviewed Nellie and Kimberly both separately and together. Both girls stated numerous times that they had refused to go back to the Webbs, and stated that they had received whippings and beatings from both Barbara and Jarrett at different times starting in 1978, approximately 8 months after moving into their home. Those beatings included implements such as extension cords, belts, rubber hoses, and a narrow piece of black rubber that was 2 feet long and had several holes at each end. That's serious. I will say, I know there's going to be people out there like, I got beat with a belt, and I did too.
Well,
but I don't necessarily think that was okay. I don't think you should probably be using an implement on your child. You know, they have multiple implements they're using to beat these kids. The girls were made to remove all of their clothing before they were hit, mainly on their back or their butt, but occasionally on their head and face. Nellie was removed from the home and placed in foster care. She was interviewed at the Washington County Sheriff's Office by State Patrol investigator Jane Tooley, who found that the abuse was not limited to beatings. If you're surprised,
of course not.
I think you should wake up. Nellie stated that she had been sexually abused,
of course she was,
starting around the age of 9 or 10, when Jarrett Webb kissed her foster father kissed her for a long time, and she pulled away because she couldn't breathe and it was nasty.
Of course it was nasty. Jesus.
She said that he was French kissing her and slobbering in her mouth at the age of 9. And he is a fucking foster father of 9. On one occasion, Jarrett made her take a nap with him, and he played with what she said was all of her body parts, touched her vagina, and put a finger inside of her. When she was 10 or 11 at night, when everyone would go to bed, he called her into his room a couple times, and when she wouldn't come, he threatened to whip her. He pulled the sheet down and put her on top of him, and she stated that she could feel he didn't have any underwear on. This is a grown man with a 10-year-old girl. At 15, Jarrett punished her by making her undress and lay on the bed, and he beat her with a rubber strap, and then he began to sexually abuse her and beat her at the same time, and when she began to cry, he left the room. So these are all stories that she's relaying to the police about
why she can't go back.
What has been happening to her. She's giving ages when this has happened. She's giving details. So in February of 1986, DSS requested an immediate and emergency removal of Kendra and Michael Webb. It listed 8 separate concerns, and these are 2 other foster children of the Webbs. The concerns that they listed among them were repeated allegations of physical abuse, told to DSS by 6 separate children during September interviews, 2 being struck for long periods of time while naked. The next was denial of meals in the home. 4 was sexual abuse, and then the last one was the intense concern for the physical and emotional well-being of the children remaining in the home. Obviously. DSS memos show that the Webbs aggressively sought to terminate their status as adoptive parents of Nellie and Kimberly immediately after Nellie ran away in 85. Under DSS rules, this termination of their status as adoptive parents would cut short the investigation into the mistreatment of the girls somehow. I don't know how.
Probably because, I don't know, because, no, well, it doesn't matter now. You're not the adoptive parents anymore or something like that.
Sure. While relinquishment of adoptive children is extremely rare, the DSS began negotiations with the Webbs to do so. Their attorney conducting negotiations on their behalf was Gary Randall, whose brother Casey, Kimberly and Nellie would have described as Larry King's maid whenever they're talking to the police about their abuse. So because we will get into it, but the Webbs were abused by Larry King, obviously. This was a whole ring, and this Webb family was just one little part of it. And the attorney conducting negotiations on the children's behalf was an abuser. It's so sickening because every time you turn in this case, someone else involved
is an abuser.
It is sick.
God, it's so disheartening.
It really is. Well, and think about how it would feel to be one of the kids.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying is, like, think about what it would be to be one of the kids or one of the victims, or, you know, where do you, like, how do you have any hope?
You don't, because at every turn you have an adult that's ready to take advantage of you.
That's the worst. Like, oh my God.
I mean, it really is awful. And we'll talk about it later, but that is part of the whole abuse, is that they are creating people who they are going to be able to discredit so easily. And they can completely take away any legitimacy that they might have with the public.
Yeah.
And it's awful. The Webbs had additional help in the relinquishment of their 2 adopted daughters by a man named Patrick Tripp, the very official who would have handled a criminal prosecution of the Webbs had there been one. Which, again, conflict of interest.
Of course.
Everywhere. Yeah. In June of 1986, in the face of a pattern of the gross abuse of children, the state suspended the Webbs' foster care license, thank goodness. But Patrick Webb decided not to file sexual abuse charges or any other charges against the Webbs, because
God damn it, dude.
let them get out of here clean. Dude, you know, don't ruin their lives.
Oh my God, let me tell you something right now. I want to say this right now. If you are being abused, fucking file charges.
Yeah.
If you're being abused sexually, if you're a minor and being abused sexually, fucking file charges. Don't just let this go, because as we'll see, unfortunately, this doesn't end in a victorious verdict.
No.
However, if some of the people that are involved in this story did tell the truth or press charges, it might have.
Well, they tried. Some of them really did. Some of them really did try.
Yes, but some of them did try and then retracted because they were scared.
Yeah.
And died anyways.
Right.
I'm just saying, always file the charge.
Okay. So instead of investigating her reports of the Webb's involvement in pornography and child prostitution, Tripp, the person who was supposed to be representing her, called her a liar. Right. Tripp's attitude was recorded by Julie Walters, a youth care worker called on to interview Nellie and Kimberly in March of 1986, because they had described the abuse of boys residing at Boys Town, which we'll get into later, the large orphanage west of Omaha where Walters was employed. In her 50-page report on the child abuse described to her by the girls, Tripp figures heavily as an adversary of the children when he is supposed to be representing them. I would be furious
of course.
I had an attorney who was an adversary. Okay, so she said, when presented with Jane Tooley's investigation, Pat Tripp, the Washington County prosecutor, said he didn't believe Nellie and wanted her to take a polygraph.
Their own attorney is like, nope, I don't believe you.
Exactly what is it that makes you not want to believe a foster child who's claiming that she's being sexually abused by her foster family and corroborated with the other children in the home?
I don't understand why this would be my attorney longer.
Why would you not believe her? You're either a sexist piece of shit or because you have ties to this fucking sex ring, piece of garbage. Okay. At his request, Nellie was given 4 polygraph tests. I know, like, really? Administered by state troopers at the state patrol office because she had the audacity to claim that she was sexually abused by her foster father. The state trooper, after Nellie's testing completed, told Kathleen Sorensen that he, quote, tried to break Nellie down a bit.
Oh my God.
But he was convinced she was telling the truth.
Oh, okay. So he wanted to, okay, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind.
But still. Although the polygraph tests show Nellie was not being deceptive, attorney Pat Tripp maintained he still did not believe what she had said. He said Nellie fantasized those stories to the point that she believed that they were true.
Why would a child fantasize that?
How would you be able to know that? How do you know that? You don't. You're just saying
There's no evidence to say that either. Was that something that was, like, was that a character flaw of hers that she used to do that? Like, you have no evidence in order to say that. So as an attorney, are you allowed to do that? You can't. I don't think you can.
But I don't think she really had a lot of say so. So,
poor child.
It's what happens whenever you don't have the money or wherewithal or whatever to be able to hire your own attorney who's actually working for you and not being hired by the people abusing you to quash your whole situation.
Right.
So Tripp's line was that child victims in Nebraska just invent abuses, and therefore their complaints need to not be taken seriously. They don't need to be investigated, or it would be repeated by one law enforcement agency after another. It's the same bullshit that they say through the whole Franklin case down to the perjury conviction of Alicia Owen, which we'll talk about later. It's just sick. Pat Tripp was a quote-unquote good friend of two individuals that were named by Nellie and Kimberly as involved with the Webbs.
Shocking. Oh my God, I'm so...
I know.
Well, I mean, that just doesn't make... I mean...
Okay.
So now that makes sense.
Fort Calhoun Superintendent of Schools, Deward Finch, who we'll talk about...
Superintendent of Schools!
Yes. Who we'll talk about many times, because not only Nellie names him, and not only Kimberly names him, but other children did as well. And then there was Fort Calhoun High School principal...
Perfect.
Kent Miller. And this information comes directly from the Franklin Committee investigation, which was not a bunch of just... a conspiracy theorist hanging around in a basement. It was actual legislature. It was senators. It was, congressmen. It wasn't, when the Webbs were away, the kids would snoop through the house, and what they found and presented were pornographic videotapes in a bag under the Webbs' bed. One specifically showed teenagers involved in sexual activity. Nellie and Kimberly knew Larry King had provided them with the tapes from eavesdropping. Pornographic magazines in the basement, and once Sean was suspected of snooping in the magazines, he was not allowed to eat for a week.
Oh my God.
So they left these things not very well hidden, and then if the kids happened to see them, they got punished in a way that they wouldn't eat for a week, or whatever other things they would do. There was also a box of quote-unquote romantic novels in Mrs. Webb's closet, and it was about mothers having sex with their sons for some reason.
Incest books. Cool. Perfect.
And then there were stacks of 8x10 photo envelopes marked "Do Not Bend." And just from what I've read, it seems like those photos were probably like headshots that were given out to pedophiles. And we'll hear about that. The report also conveys the Webb's pricey lifestyle and involvement of more people, including none other than Larry King. Although at a hearing in March of '86, Mr. Webb stated that he earned $32,000 a year, the Webb's home was furnished lavishly, and Mrs. Webb had a 4-carat diamond ring and all custom-made dresses. Oh. And when the Webbs threw a party, they included caterers and limos. And I'm not trying to... I don't make much... I don't know if I make more or not than that, but I know for sure I don't have the money to cater parties with limos.
No way! Are you
and
kidding?
Caterers and...
Custom-made dresses?
Custom-made dresses. I'm lucky to go somewhere that isn't Target to get a dress. Come on now. Larry King had parties every other week, and he would request that one of the Webb's kids attend. They had no choice in the matter. If you were in the Webb home, you had to go. The Webb's children said that they talked to boys at the parties who were from Boys Town. And after examining yearbooks from a few years prior, Kimberly said 4 of the boys attended some of Larry's parties during the summer of '84 and '85. One of them was Paul Benassi, who she actually identified in the yearbook. It's just, and oh my God, it just infuriates me. It infuriates me.
I feel so deeply for Paul Benassi, dude.
Oh, I know.
Oh
I know.
My God.
I know. It's really, he's a prime example of the way that an abuser will discredit somebody just to the point where they have no charge. They can't even make allegations against you anymore. So
they've been so discredited that,
it's disgusting. So at the parties, they said that there were 30 to 40 adults that would be present. There was both men and women, and the attendees were more white than black because Larry said, quote,
Larry King, who is
black,
a black man.
He said, blacks get ignorant when they drink and tighter with their money. Whites spend more money when they're drunk. And when he's talking about spending money, let's not forget that he's talking about on children to have sex with.
Right.
Not fucking, alcohol and
television
strippers of age.
Yeah.
Also present at these parties were some prostitutes and kids aged 16 to 22, about 20 total. If a man was interested in a young lady, he held out a folded $50 or $100 bill, and he would whisper something in their ear, and then they would go upstairs or some other room in the house. So Nellie and Kimberly said that these victims, who they referred to as prostitutes, told them they gave half of their money to Larry King. So they go and blow some old dude for $50, and they have to give 25 of that to Larry King.
Oh my god. What an asshole.
Oh,
what
yes,
a fucking
obviously.
Piece of, oh, well, yeah, clearly. I'm just like, God, fuck you.
Right.
You don't have to be victimized in any capacity.
No.
Fuck off.
So Larry would also give some of these children gifts. The boys had said on multiple occasions that they would give them new cars. It would almost probably be like, wait, he's really treating us. Right. He's really treating us nice. They said sexual activity was not always going on behind closed doors. It sometimes would involve more than two people and be out in the open. Larry claimed to donate money to Boys Town and he was on the board of directors at the Girls Club.
Great.
He would get boys to his home by asking them to do yard work. And if he asked them to do something and they refused, he might hit them and tell them that they would get hurt if they didn't do what he said. I'm sure it was kind of grooming them for further activity. Nellie said that Larry had a really bad temper, and I'm not surprised in the least. Nellie accompanied Mr. and Mrs. King and their son Prince to Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York, beginning at the age of 15. She missed 21 days of school entirely under the pretense that she was accompanying her aunt and uncle to be Prince's babysitter, when really she was going out to, well, as we'll see, on those trips. Nellie said that she saw, at the time, Vice President George Bush Sr., and saw him again at one of Larry's parties. And we're not necessarily saying that George Bush was raping kids, but he was mentioned in the Bohemian Grove.
He was mentioned a lot in a lot of places.
Yeah, further here. So, we can't say for sure that anything was going on, but the fact that he was there, just like the fact that Clinton was there with Epstein so many times on his private jet and going to that island of his, it's very suspicious because according to most of the people who were there actually in those places, you can't be there and not be aware that there's the sexual abuse of children going on.
Absolutely.
You can't. So, whatever. Take that for what you will. So Nellie said that at the time that the party that she saw George Bush attend had only older men and young men in their early 20s. It wasn't a lot of children. It was just more of the young twink fetish, I guess. So Nellie said that she had seen sexual activity go on at these parties time and time again, and every guest had a bodyguard, some of them wearing guns on their person. Because, those kids that you're abusing, you need to
protect yourself
have
against
guns
them, yeah.
For
sure.
Yeah.
I would.
All guests had to produce a card which was run through a machine to verify the guest was who they said they were, and then they were then frisked before entering. Which, I don't think that's so unbelievable. They probably do have kind of, it's a little bit more, a step above a secret code word to get in. After Nellie and Kimberly raised Larry King's name, Detective Julie Waters asked some discreet questions about King from Boys Town employees and some people in the Omaha community. Some of the responses that she got were, quote, "If you mess with him, you're going to get your legs broken." Or, "On the outside, he has all the appearances of an upstanding citizen, but underneath, he is very dirty." Another said, "Omaha has a very large underworld, and he's a very powerful man nationally. Maybe he didn't have all the connections personally, but he knows people who do. King used to be very active in Big Brothers, and he took more than an appropriate interest in the young men." Okay. So, clearly, this isn't a complete secret to everyone in Omaha. Kimberly overheard her foster mother, Mrs. Webb, tell someone over the phone regarding Fort Calhoun School District Superintendent, the creep Dewey Finch. I think it's Dewey Finch or Deward Finch. It's Mr. Finch. She says, "I got him all the way. I caught him several times down there with black girls." So another thing we'll talk about, we've talked about it before, is the blackmailing that goes on in these types of situations. People who took part in this abuse were blackmailed left and right. So what she probably overheard her foster mother saying was, "Now I've got this
dirt on him
to do whatever I want to do." Nellie and Kimberly saw Mr. Finch leave the Webb home on numerous occasions. They would come meet with him at the school office. Sometimes Principal Kent Miller was also present. Mrs. Webb carried a very large Gucci bag, and she said that the girl said that in that bag that she had photo envelopes that they'd seen in the closet at least a couple times, telling Kimberly that she was showing him pictures from a trip.
Okay, sure.
But like I said, we've heard about this before, and when there's this sex trafficking going on, it's disgusting, but they treat these kids like you're fucking auditioning for an acting role. And so they have all of these photos that she carries around so that she can show this principal and the superintendent, what kid here do you want to...
They treat them like products.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
They treat them like products. Like, do you want this bag, or do you want this bag, or do you want this chair or this chair? Mm-hmm. Like, it's fucking gross.
It is gross. The Walters report and DSS logs were turned over to law enforcement agencies by March of 1986, but nobody was ever indicted. Jarrett and Barbara Webb were set free, and nothing came of it whatsoever. In May of 1988, a woman named Margot Georgiou and her 17-year-old daughter Brenda Parker filed a complaint against an Omaha photographer named Rusty Nelson. Mm. And Rusty Nelson was mentioned in Bohemian Grove as the photographer who was propositioned by Hunter S. Thompson to record a snuff film for Larry King. They filed this complaint under possible child pornography. After being propositioned by Nelson, who gave them his card and multiple references and agreed to allow Brenda's mother to accompany her on the shoot, they agreed to come to his residence for a modeling shoot. During the shoot, he repeatedly tried to persuade 17-year-old Brenda to pose in lingerie and show as much cleavage as possible. While her daughter was being photographed, and let's be honest, Margot, you're not completely innocent here. What the fuck were you thinking? Her mother, Margot, looked around at the photos, scattered around the apartment, and said that they included photos of girls ranging from ages of 12 to 20, most of them completely nude. So, they were offered a huge platter of fresh fruit and champagne while they were in Rusty Nelson's apartment, and he continuously mentioned his boss, who set him up with the apartment and kept it well stocked, which they noted in the police report. An officer was sent to Nelson's apartment to investigate and quickly established that Larry King was the boss that Nelson referenced during Brenda's photo shoot. In May of 1988, 2 officers went to the Twin Towers apartments, and they spoke with the owner, who said that Rusty Nelson was occupying apartment 3B, which was leased to Larry King, but had suddenly moved out of the apartment on May 14th, 9 days after Brenda and her mother had filed the complaint.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
Right. Larry King also paid the rent on a luxury penthouse in the same building because obviously he's not going to get Rusty the same apartment. He gets himself.
Are you kidding me?
Yes. The owner said that King put over $50,000 into the apartment, and the couch that he bought was so big and it didn't fit in, he had to hire a crane to get it into his apartment. He had reportedly had a solid silver chair and drove at least 5 separate vehicles. King did not live at this penthouse. He just used it occasionally for parties and to stay on here and there.
Oh my God, you're not even living in the fucking apartment, you asshole.
He also rented an apartment at the neighboring complex called Orpheum Tower, where he said he needed it for when he had to work late and didn't want to travel home.
Why would you buy it in the neighboring complex? Why wouldn't you just use the one that you're already using?
It literally makes no sense.
No, it doesn't.
Officer Hoke asked Orpheum manager if she knew or had heard any particulars on Larry King, as it was strange that he would rent an apartment at the Orpheum when he already had one.
Oh my God, how funny!
At the Twin Towers, which is obviously very
it's so
shady.
Suspicious. It's so weird.
She stated that she'd heard rumors he was very heavy into drug dealing from more than one individual. She also heard he was a homosexual and had a preference for young men or boys. The police dropped its probe of Rusty Nelson, his apparent pornographic operation, and his boss. Shockingly enough. But in late June of 1988, an officer, Carmine, was dispatched to another girl that had a very similar story. Her name was Loretta Smith. She was 15, and she lived with her mother and her brother in Omaha. At the time Carmine spoke with her, she was at Richard Young Hospital, where she told her therapist about, in her words, quote, incidents in which she had been photographed nude or partially nude, as well as instances of devil worship. Loretta began that 5 to 6 years prior, when she was 9, she went to a party with her friends who were much older than her, which is definitely something I heard time and time again with the Epstein.
For sure.
She met a white male who coaxed her into letting him photograph her, first fully clothed, and eventually he coerced her into getting nude. On other occasions, she went to the North Omaha Girls Club on Lake Street, where Larry King was a board member, and with her friends, and she identified those friends as being Kimberly and Nellie Webb, like we just talked about from the foster home, who she said were discovered and were also, or she discovered were also quote unquote modeling. They were taken on quote field trips where they were taken to a studio where they were photographed nude or partially clothed. These were kids. Loretta had not spoken to the girls in over 3 years. She stated that there were a number of adults, both men and women, that participated in photographing nude children. She also indicated a number of prominent individuals that included doctors, lawyers, and God knows who else, although they used code names and she could not actually give them their actual names.
God, that sucks.
Yeah.
That fucking sucks.
Loretta also indicated that adult leaders that took the photos used threats against her and others for their participation, and she had been told on occasion that she and her whole family would be killed if she refused to participate. Loretta mentioned Larry King as one of those individuals. Shocking, and what a coincidence.
That's crazy. All of these people are tied to Larry King. That's nuts.
It can't be because he's actually guilty.
No.
When asked how she knew this, she said that she was the friend of a daughter of a man named Gary West, who owned a gay club, Max. She said when he became intoxicated, he would tell stories about certain activities with Larry King and indicated he was into the use of cocaine for personal use as well as for sale, and that he owed Larry King a lot of money for this, which is not probably a great position to be in. She indicated that King owned a house on Wirt Street and held lots of drug and sex parties there. She stated she'd been at the Wirt house and she saw 4 teenage boys engaged in oral sex. Later, she gave Carmine the address and phone number for the house on Wirt Street. When he called the number, the phone was answered with King Company. And at the house, Carmine witnessed the name King in black script lettering on an awning.
Okay.
During 1988, Loretta began trusting her doctors and nurses as she got to know them, and she began to open up and reveal even more that she had witnessed and had gone through. And in a report for the legislature's Franklin Committee in 1989, it stated that Loretta had said that she provided additional information of cult activity, including witnessing homicides of several young children, in which also include in reference Larry King and others. And, you know, we talked about this again in Bohemian Grove. In August of 1988, Loretta was asked to give chronological accounts of her involvement in the cult, and she agreed. She said she initially did not know what was happening and became involved very gradually.
Like it happens most time. They want to start normalizing the behavior and and there's a word for it. It's grooming.
At approximately 9 years old, she was going to the Omaha Girls Club, and a guy named Ray would take the girls on outings, which included about 5 to 6 girls total. The first time he took them to a seemingly abandoned building and asked if they wanted to go in, and they all agreed. They sat and talked, and Ray provided a joint, and they all got high.
At 9. Perfect.
Yeah. This activity continued for 3 weeks, and then Ray took them to a party. At the party, there were 10 men, all in their mid-30s. Initially, they sat around talking with the girls about their problems while everyone got wasted.
Again, she's 9. How many problems do you have at 9?
Well, she has a lot.
Well, clearly she's got a lot, but I'm saying
I know, but these kids have a lot. Then the men made the girls have sex with them. They had no choice whatsoever. Loretta stayed away from the girls' club after that for a few days, but then to get out of the house, she did go to the parties again for another 6 months. On one occasion, she threatened to tell her mother that the men knew she was 9 and they were forcing her to have sex, and they threatened anyone who told anyone that they were going to be murdered.
Of course.
The men started taking the girls to, quote, power meetings when Loretta was 10. She said that they had a lot of lit candles, and at one of the first meetings, the girls were told the room was going to spin for a while, which obviously she realized later meant that they got drugged. 8 minutes later, they were put through the first, quote-unquote, test. Her and the other girls were taken to a building in Omaha where she was locked in a room with a white infant. Around midnight, the men came in the room and they took the little girl away. They told her that she could achieve power by killing something that she really loved. She said the men then cut the little girl's head off, stuck it on the wall, and made her sit in front of it. She later had to take the head off the wall, and the men held her down while they cut the little girl's eyes out. Then they left Loretta in the room with the girl's body. locking the front door for 24 hours, during which she could hear another of the girls screaming while the men were whipping and beating her. Shortly after the men came into the room and told her she had passed the test and drove her a couple blocks from her home and let her out of the car. The next time she saw the men, she was at a friend's party, where the men showed up. She identified two of them as Larry King and a Mr. Finch, who Loretta indicated was a principal. Shocking, having all this information. So there's also this other part of me that's like, okay, it's possible that happened. There's also this other part of me that's like, maybe that was some sort of sleep deprivation type of thing where they maybe use like a realistic doll or something. I have no idea, but it's very possible that they did that. Yeah. You know, I'm not going to say it's beyond the realm of possibility in any way whatsoever.
Yeah, the part of me that's like, I really hope that didn't happen is kind of like the part of me that's like, that wants to agree with that. That, oh yeah, maybe they were just torturing her mentally. Yeah. Maybe.
Which isn't great either,
which
obviously.
Obviously isn't amazing. But
I mean, that's just brutal. But anyway, so after one party, another girl called the police and reported that she was raped, and she tried to press charges. And other girls in the same situation covered up the rape for the men. Why? Because you just have no autonomy whatsoever. And you're just afraid. You're just so afraid. Loretta threatened to tell her mom again, and the men said that they would kill her and her mom if she spoke a word of it. At another meeting, Loretta indicated that devil worship was practiced and a small boy was sacrificed. She and another girl could hear him screaming, then said the child was fried and fed to the girls. My God. Loretta said she refused to participate, so she was beaten for 2 days. She described 3 more incidents where sacrifices for power took place, is what they called them. One was a 1-year-old white female had her head taken off by a saw. Another was a 4-year-old white male was hung on the wall and darts were thrown at him. Jeez. And another was a 3-year-old Indian female had several parts of her body cut off, then ground and poured over the girls, and they were forced to drink her remains. And I have to say, like, man, she's not that old. That would be quite an imagination. 10. Yeah. Where do you get that? How at 10 do you even have that in your brain unless you've been traumatically abused for your entire life?
I mean, what was I thinking of at 10?
I mean, not this. Not grinding up babies and pouring them all over people. And during the spring of 1985, when Loretta was 11, the 3rd, 4th, and 5th sacrifices took place, and the individuals at the sacrifices were Mr. Finch, a King Horses, and the big guy, which she referred to in an earlier deposition. And
wait, this guy was named King Horses?
Well, that's his nickname.
Jesus Christ.
The men would try to scare the girls by making them watch them mutilate animals, and obviously children if that was true, right. And that they just torture them by cutting off body parts instead of killing them. She said that cult members' clothes had upside-down crosses on them. Get no ideas, everybody. And the leader always wore a long cape with gold rings. A long black cape with gold rings shaped like skeleton heads. Okay, fancy pants. She went into Emmanuel Hospital for the first time in October of 1985, and then January and then March of 1986. So this is obviously, she's in and out quite often. To the expert eye of the Foster Care Review Board Executive Director Carol Stitt, when she received the reports from Loretta's caseworker, the testimony appeared highly credible. She said, "One thing you want to keep in mind, this girl is very concrete about who was present at these homicides, what was happening, dates, and gave lots of specific information. When working with children, one of the ways you know this is not a global fantasy is the more details that they give you." So, it's obvious that to most people of the hospital workers, the foster care review board, they believed that Loretta was being abused here. But then you go to the police and they're like, get out of here with this nonsense. Take a polygraph test. You're lying. Info that was given by Loretta Smith overlapped and corroborated what was already at the hands of authorities from children at the Webb house and from Margot Georgiou and her daughter. So it wasn't like this was all out of the blue. Yeah. This is 3 separate cases involving pornography, child abuse, and ritual murder, children's testimony, and other evidence that converged on Larry King. In July of 1988, Omaha police officers in the Robbery and Sex Unit lied to their boss, Chief Robert Wadman, about their investigation into Larry King and told him that they were not investigating him when they were directly asked by him about it because God damn it. They had been conducting a super sensitive investigation, and they weren't even using the steno poll at the time, is how they all communicated. But they were handwriting all of their police reports because they feared a police cover-up of King's activities was going on from none other than Robert Wadman.
Well,
shockingly enough, we'll hear about him more. And if you listen to the first episode, you'll have heard about him. But God damn it, I'm pissed.
Foster Care Review Board official Dennis Carlson, in testimony to the legislature's executive board in December of 1988, said the investigation into Loretta Smith's charges didn't go far in Wadman's department, and neither did the career of Officer Carmian. Shocking. One afternoon in June of 88, immediately after his interview with Loretta, Carmian's supervisor, Sergeant Ken Bovasso, spoke to Dr. Kay Schilling, Loretta's psychiatrist at the hospital. He proceeded to write a report stating that Loretta only gave very general information to Carmian and he would have to follow up to build rapport. But Carmian didn't come back.
And he collected more than just general information.
There was a lot more. Yeah. That's kind of specific. Everything that she said was pretty specific.
Yeah. Names, dates,
Yeah. Situations, people. Doctors and the executive board director, Carlson, called investigator Carmian 3 or more times, telling him Loretta was giving more and more information about Larry King and tons of additional information, and she was relating better to her caseworkers. They begged him to please come back and re-interview the girl, as she was talking about homicides. Carmian said he needed to get back out and interview her, but he never came again. Carlson said that he hand-delivered information and seemed genuine about investigating the allegations, and in the end had completely abandoned everything, not even interviewing the girl about the homicide allegations.
Well, yeah, okay, we'll go into it.
The FCRB executive director, Carol Stitt, testified, saying, "I'd like to add something that was highly unusual in this case. Loretta's psychiatrist contacted police in Omaha asking them to come. Her personal care worker, Ken Stoner, contacted police. Richard Young, hospital employee Kristen Hallberg, contacted police, as well as Adrienne Hart, who is Kristen's supervisor, all made contact with the police, and nothing was done."
This is a running theme in this case.
Not long after his interview with Loretta, Carmian was transferred out of investigations altogether.
Which explains, I guess, why he abandoned the case, but to me, it's like, if you were a real good cop, you should have just kept it.
You should have kept going and asking questions. At the same executive board meeting, Senator Ernie Chambers recounted a phone conversation he had with Carmian. He said, "When I called the sexual assault unit, they said Carmian is no longer here, and that's when they told me he is in research and planning. I finally got him on the phone, and he mentioned his enthusiasm at the outset and what I developed in terms of credible information being given to me. I felt he'd been transferred because he was getting too close to something, and his supervisors did not want him to continue." So there was a silence, and he kind of chuckled and said, "Well, no, I wanted a transfer."
I'm sure. Into research and planning.
Yeah. "I've known Carmian for years, and he's not the type to want to be put into an office where he's the only one there. In fact, it might have been a creation of the department. He didn't even have a secretary."
Like, there wasn't even a position, but they had to make one for him just to get him out of the business. Yep.
Carmian himself testified in June of 1989, and although he was pulled off the case, he thought Loretta's charges were credible and deserved follow-up. Less than 2 weeks later, Chief Wadman tried to get Carmian declared crazy by posting an inter-office communication to Omaha Public Safety Director Pittman Foxall, who also happened to be one of Larry King's cousins, where Wadman announced that Carmian needed a mental health evaluation.
Fuck you, Wadman.
He said, based on actions demonstrated during the Larry King investigation, the investigation into Larry King never came close to supporting the allegations, thus trying to discredit him.
Yes, because I refused to believe them because I was involved.
Right, of course.
I refused to openly believe them because I was raping kids too.
Right.
Fuck you. I fucking want to blow up so many buildings. Just kidding. Just kidding. So one other Omaha policeman was reported to have kept a file on Larry King. His name was Bill Skoleski, and he died of a heart attack, which may be the truth.
Maybe.
In this case, I seriously have to wonder if anybody can die of natural causes.
There's so many. There's a 5-page list of people who are involved in this case who have died under suspicious circumstances. That I'm like, I don't know.
It's very, very questionable. In August of 1989, Chief Wadman dismissed Loretta's and the other children's claims of horrific abuse. On an Omaha radio station, the chief law enforcement officer, who shouldn't have been that, said some Omahans had a, quote, twisted fascination with child abuse and sex abuse, and that media attention of those things is inappropriate.
I didn't know that Omaha had such a reputation for being fascinated with child abuse and sex abuse.
Well, only because they have so many people doing it.
Right.
Regarding Loretta, he said that she made bizarre statements not founded in reality. I hope that Robert Wadman is burning for eternity somewhere. He said that the police and other agencies conducted a thorough investigation, and all allegations led to a dead end. I don't know how you could see a dead end in any of the... in any of the allegations.
No, you didn't even... The way that it leads to a dead end is because you're not at all looking or... Listening.
At all to one word. Like 20 minutes with this girl, and you have multiple leads. He swore this under oath, along with saying that he hardly knew Larry King and had very few social contacts in common. Larry King, however, said otherwise. In an April 89 interview with Larry King and Chief Wadman in the Omaha News, they are questioned on an incident in which Wadman intervened at King's request to release a suitcase that was seized in a drug raid. He said that they had the kind of friendship where he could just ask this favor of intervening in a drug raid to give him some of the evidence. King said, "I felt that I could call on anyone in this city." Yeah, because you had blackmail evidence on pretty much everybody.
Of course you can.
Diddling children like pieces of fucking trash. Wadman explained his version of the Rusty Nelson situation, blowing it off and saying Rusty was a legit photographer who had simply subleased his apartment from King. Coincidence is all it is. But remember that Rusty called King his boss, and he was not found to be legit with any of his references. And so I don't really think that he was a legitimate photographer, just happened to lease a apartment from Larry King. Fuck off. Wadman also swore under oath that he knew nothing of the business relationship claims, the lavish spending, multiple decadent apartments, drug dealing, or pedophile activity. At this time, John DeCamp was a delegate for the state of Nebraska, so he had been in some political situations with Larry King, particularly at the Republican National Convention in 1984 and 1988. He noticed that Larry King threw these seriously lavish parties that exceeded the estimates that people gave him, and how they said, oh, he probably spent a couple $1,000s, and it was like, okay, no way. There was too much stuff going on. Like we said earlier, those parties they threw at their own home were lavish, where they had caterers, they had limousines, taking people home. No. He threw these parties in Dallas and New Orleans, as that's where the RNC was being held, and at the RNC in Dallas in 1984, that's the first time that John DeCamp had ever learned who Larry King even was. He was told that in order to be a good Republican, that he had to attend this party that was sponsored by Larry King. He was essentially, you go to Larry King's party or else you're out of the Republican club. Oh no, I can't.
I don't want to be out of the club.
I want out of any political affiliation club at all costs. Get me the fuck out of there. So Larry King at this time, his salary was less than $16,000 a year. It was around $16,000 a year. I don't know.
How are you? How?
I have no idea.
I want to know how you're affording lavish ass parties at $16,000 a year. Are you fucking kidding me?
With inflation, it's really not that much more because
it's in the 80s, 90s.
It's just crazy. So the Nebraska Credit Union Association, they filed a lawsuit against Larry King, and they were able to itemize his personal expenditures were estimated at $4 million. $1 million was on an American Express credit card, just paying bills and whatnot. I'm sure all your mortgages and all of the different apartments that you've rented out to ferry off children to go have sex with is probably what he was paying for with that $1 million.
Of course.
There was $148,000 for just limousine charges. Then there was $70,000 for a place called Floral Concepts, which...
Can you imagine spending $70,000
Yes.
a year on...
Absolutely.
Yes. Oh, I guess flowers just aren't my thing.
Like, flowers, maybe. Like, I do think there's something to be said for having some nice flowers in the home.
Yes.
But if it was a gardening center, that would be more understandable for me. I could spend $70,000 in one day at the garden center. There was $60,000 on a MasterCard, and then there's about $40,000 on another credit card. He gave himself $37,000, and then $27,000 went to Omaha Jewelry. It was a shit ton of money that, in all, came out to be about $40 million that he had. And we'll talk about it more, but he stole $40 million from the bank. From DeCamp's experience, and he was the chairman of the Banking, Commerce, and Insurance Committee, so it wasn't like he was just talking nonsense. He said that with all the regulatory controls that are in place, it is absolutely impossible for that amount of theft to occur without the cooperation of higher-up officials. And coincidentally, another bank, Nebraska's largest, called First Tier, every single cent that was stolen from the Franklin Credit Union, all 40 million went through First Tier Bank. So they had some fucking idea about what was going on there. This bank would later be forced to pay over $10 million in damages for their role in the improprieties related to the Franklin Credit Union scandal, which they were like, we were just pulled in. We're innocent
We had no
victims.
idea. I'm sorry, but I work at a credit union. There are just some suspicious ass activities. Like, there are reasons that you have to fill out, it's called the CTR. You have to fill shit out for the IRS. There's no way he could have filtered $40 million.
The manager of a fucking credit union.
I'm sorry.
In the same city as you have to know have some idea.
Of course.
Where does he get $40 million?
Of course, exactly.
So, basically, there was no way Larry King was able to pull this off on his own. It had to have included people that were the highest level officials and politicians. So he was insinuating that these institutions of government had been compromised and obviously were corrupt. Clearly, that's the case. Nobody expected that this investigation was going to lead to anything else beyond a huge financial scandal, because that in itself was quite very much insane, $40 million. But then people started mentioning the school superintendents being involved with prostitution of children, Boys and Girls Club, being linked to child sex rings, and it was a complete shit show.
And so the legislature's investigation began in October of 1988 and ended on January 9th of 1991 when a new legislature was sworn in. They had the option to renew the investigation but didn't because many members knew the stakes and they were terrified. DeCamp knew that the Omaha World-Herald had been publishing false info, but had previously had no forum or legal right to respond to the false claims.
Just shouting from the rooftop. They're lying! Basically what I'm doing.
They're lying. He was an attorney specializing in cases of allegations by children against adults in the area of child abuse.
He was a goddamn expert in this
whole situation.
Yes.
Within the year prior to writing the book where we got most of our information, the Franklin Cover-Up, he had overturned 2 felony charges against men in rural Nebraska who were charged with abusing their daughters based on allegations from their daughters. But DeCamp was convinced they were not telling the truth. So he was fighting against
the girls
who were not telling the truth.
Yes.
But he's like, no, but these people are telling the truth.
Yeah, so that
lends a lot of credence to this particular individual.
That's why I felt like it was important to mention that, because he wasn't just going around boy who cried wolfing all over town about every kid that claimed abuse. So it was legit. He was legitimately out there to find out the fucking truth. Right.
That's amazing. What a great fucking man.
Seriously.
He successfully proved this in both cases when the daughters broke down about lying and told him the reason they made up the lies about abuse. DeCamp also served as the lawyer for the National Child Abuse Defense and Resources Center of Nebraska, which fights against false accusations of child abuse made up of adults who have been falsely accused of child abuse. He says without reservation in one Franklin-related instance after another that there was sufficient evidence and corroboration available for anyone seeking it to back the victim's stories. The legislature's main investigator, the late Gary Caradori, had an enormous amount of leads that law enforcement wouldn't pursue. The treatment of Alicia Owen and Paul Benassi is one clue in what will be done to suppress the truth about Franklin Credit Union the Franklin Credit Union scandal and its broader implications.
Which we will talk about, but I mean, fuck. It makes me so angry.
It makes me so sad for Paul Bonacci, dude. It's really heartbreaking, dude. This guy never fucking had a chance.
No, absolutely had no chance. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's one of those situations where from the moment he was old enough to have any comprehension, he was being abused and used as a pawn in a sick fucking game that adults refuse to acknowledge. It's disgusting. In SOS America, which was a 1990 report from Washington-based Children's Defense Fund, it was reported that 2.2 million children were reported abused, neglected, or both in 1987. This was a 225% increase in a 10-year span and a 48% increase in the previous 5 years. That's astronomical.
Staggering.
Yes. Dr. Nicholas Groth, the director of the Sex Offenders Program at the Connecticut Correctional Institute, told the New York Times in 1990, if we saw the same number of children suddenly developing the same kind of illness, we'd think we had a major epidemic on our hands.
Yes.
It's abuse for them, and so we don't even think about it as any fucking thing whatsoever. It's just, they're lying.
Oh man, there's a lot more of these liars.
Oh my gosh. A 28-year FBI veteran and former special agent in charge of the Bureau's LA Field Division, who doesn't want to be named, said that the FBI doesn't keep record of the number of missing children that go on in a year. They keep an accurate number of stolen cars, homicides, rapes, robberies, but not disappeared kids. Wow. He is convinced that this is because the staggering number of missing children would draw immediate public outcry for the FBI to take action on the problem. But, as we've seen, they might have some hand in it.
They've got a hand in it, for sure.
The Franklin Credit Union scandal, centered in Omaha, Nebraska, gives insight into the horrific world of child abuse and organized, illegal drug peddling, patronized, and protected by powerful... This is an alliteration for the fucking ages. Goddamn. Patronized and protected by powerful political and business figures.
Jesus Christ, Ashley.
She sells seashores. She sells seashores.
Not seashells, no. Seashores.
The case received very little media attention in 1988 when the Franklin Credit Union was raided by federal agencies and shut down. So the financial scandal and the investigation into the credit union soon developed into more of a situation when it became known that children from Omaha and surrounding cities had been flown from city to city to be abused at parties held by Franklin Credit Union's officers and well-known Nebraskans, including nationally prominent Republican Party activists. I'm trying not to be partisan here, but there's a lot of Republican mentions in this one.
I know. I really don't want to either. I hate having any kind of partisanship.
3 years later, the locals are told that the case is closed and people living outside eastern Nebraska probably never even knew it existed.
I didn't know it existed until I heard it from you.
Right, and people in Nebraska told me they never knew it existed.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about Gary Caradori. He was the Franklin investigation's new chief investigator. He told his wife in August of 1989, if even half of what I've heard is true, this is the biggest thing to ever hit Nebraska. In September of 1989, someone broke into the Caradori's home. By January of that next year, Caradori wrote Nebraska Secretary of State that he and his employees had been followed and questionable situations had arisen during the investigation. He said threatening situations resulted numerous times. Why? He asked. Am I too close to something they don't want to become public?
Yes.
Yes. In early April, a repairman reported to Caradori that his phone was tapped.
Oh my God.
Something that was verified by the phone company. Still, Caradori continued with his investigation because he was a badass.
Badass motherfucker.
I mean, I hate to say that it caught up with him.
What a badass to continue.
I know.
Yes, it does. But what an absolute badass.
Right. And that's what, when you go into public service, that is how you should be.
That is how a public servant should be.
And not fucking denying abused victims, their allegations, denying them and telling them that they're liars and all the other horrific things that they have done, or, choking a man to death on the fucking sidewalk. Which, by the way, which is a very side note, I hadn't watched the whole video from the moment that he got pulled over. I was so mad.
He was so nervous. He was going through a panic attack.
Because I
just watched it the other day too.
The fact that he was like, I almost got shot in this exact same situation before.
Oh my God.
And that cop had his gun pulled on him from like the moment he walked over.
I know.
And you fucking choke him to death?
Dude,
how does it go to that?
How do you see that situation and say, you know, this guy's freaking out, and how do you not have human empathy to say, let's calm him down? Like, there was no instance in that situation where they were like, hey dude, just calm down.
Treat him like a human being.
Just like, no. I've seen other stuff where they're like, just calm down, relax. Let's just ask you some questions. It was escalation.
I just can't. I've been reading into the Minneapolis Police Department lately. Mm-hmm. Well, partially because of this, because of Nick. Right. And they're awful. They're rotten. Like, we already knew this because,
right. But clearly they are. Clearly they are, because the crux of the situation happened here. There was,
well, and there's more. Okay.
Next time.
I'm just so angry about so many things. Okay, so let's go back to the Franklin credit. Let's go back to the other thing that we're angry about. So Caradori was continuing with his investigation, and in late May of 1990, he wrote to the Franklin Committee chairman, Lauren Schmidt, telling the senator that he felt that they were the only ones seriously working to get the case, quote, out in the open, and he felt the investigation should be terminated. He got to the point where he was actually that frightened.
He was like, oh no.
Someone who was like, really, I'm trying to get this no matter what. Yep. In June, he attended a barbecue where most attendees were members of a, quote, concerned parents group of citizens that were outraged about the lack of serious investigation into the allegations of child abuse by state and federal authorities and the campaign by the Omaha World Herald, fuck you, to discredit young victim witnesses.
Great.
He arrived at the barbecue in a 10-year-old Corvette. He said that he had to take it out of storage because he believed his other vehicles had been tampered with. And he was so sure that he was so sure of this that he said no one has ever seen this car before because it's been in storage, so he knew he could drive it.
Oh my God.
And I'm telling you, this is a professional investigator who is driven to the brink of paranoia because of what was happening with him, and then he happens to die in this inexplicable way. What are the fucking chances of that? What are the fucking chances of that? So he said he was planning to sell his boat due to the possibility of tampering, but he really feared that someone was going to tamper with his plane, saying it would be so easy to tamper with a plane. Ugh. Later that June, Caradori phoned Senator Schmidt and excitedly told him, "We got them," saying he had just developed new evidence and there's no way they can get out of it now. On the phone. Okay. No. He had met with Rusty Nelson, the photographer, and Rusty had given him a bunch of photographs that he said implicated tons of super powerful people. There was no way that they could deny it. Like, and that's why he said, we got him. There's no way they can get out of it. So he and his son, Andrew, were flying to Chicago for the All-Star game in early July. He told Senator Schmidt, that he was going to do a little investigating on the side while he was there, and he would review the evidence with the senator upon his return. On the Wednesday morning that he was to return, Senator Schmidt was in his office talking with a journalist about the Franklin investigation, relating the numerous threats received by himself and Caradori's evaluation that they wouldn't kill either of them because, in his words, it was too obvious. But then again, you never know. At 10:30 a.m., Schmidt received a call telling him that Gary Caradori was dead. At 2:30 a.m. on July 11th, Gary and his son were flying back to Nebraska when a farmer reported seeing a bright flash of light in the sky, heard an explosion, and saw a plane plummet toward the ground. Both Gary and his son AJ were killed, with wreckage scattered over 3/4 of a mile. The eyewitness account of a flash and explosion were aired on the early edition of local TV news in Nebraska, but after that, it was pulled from all the subsequent reports.
Why?
Gary's brother said that he had recently told him he hoped they didn't cover up the investigation findings, that there were lots of big names included, and he hoped their money wouldn't sweep it under the rug.
Of course it would.
He cared dearly and worked day and night for the victims. Sandy Caradori, Gary's wife, never even received official notification of her son and her husband's deaths. She only heard about it on the news and from her fucking friends because they didn't want to no one wanted anything to do with it. It's like, oh, it's one of those situations where it's like, I had something to do with it, so I'm just gonna wipe my hands and run away and let you figure that out yourself. I mean, it's really not hard to see what's right in front of your face. Early the next day, before their bodies were back from Illinois, the FBI descended upon Gary Caradori's office with a subpoena for all his records.
Oh, fuck you!
It was later found that Caradori's briefcase, which supposedly contained the newly acquired evidence that he had spoke about to Senator Schmidt and was purported to contain damning photo evidence, was missing from the wreckage altogether. No sign of it whatsoever.
Of course not.
According to the Lincoln Journal, the day after Caradori's death, Schmidt confirmed that Gary Caradori had been trying to obtain photos that some alleged victims said were taken of them during the period that they were being abused. He also confirmed that Caradori had been told that some of those allegedly involved in child sex abuse had exposed some victims to satanic cultism. He was working on places and times. He was also working on leads in Washington, D.C. So there was a great deal of mystery surrounding the crash, clearly. After months of investigation, the National Transportation Safety Board could come up with no cause for the crash. From late 1988 to mid-1991, at least 15 people related to the Franklin investigation, from investigators to alleged perpetrators to potential witnesses, died suddenly, many of them violent deaths. And we're going to talk about that at the end. Gary Caradori was not in any way the only death, like we already said, that was extremely, extremely suspicious. When the National Transportation Safety Board investigated for months and they could come up with not one cause for the crash, I find that to be mildly suspicious. So like I said, in Chicago, he had met with Rusty Nelson, who was the child pornographer, and also, I believe, a blackmail photographer, because he went to all these parties and was like known to be taking photos the whole time. And as we know, these cult leaders or abusers, whatever you want to, I mean, it's pretty much all these people in power. They tend to want to be able to use stuff against you later on, because I guess that's how they retain their power and maybe keep their secrets as much as they can.
Just make sure that you can't really say anything for fear of your own reputation being damaged or your own relationships being damaged.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Isolate you.
Right. And Gary had spent a lot of time with Rusty. He said that he was an unsavory guy, but that in an investigation like this, that you have to spend time with unsavory people.
Yes.
It's just how it went. So anyway, Rusty had said that he had given Gary pictures detailing the pedophilic exploits of Larry King and other very powerful people that they met in Chicago, that they had 4 points of corroboration other than Nelson, that Gary Caradori did get pictures in Chicago. He was flying back to Lincoln, Nebraska when his plane exploded, or whatever happened.
I had also read that Rusty Nelson had caches of photos, like just scattered about by different rocks or like rock formations, and he had them hidden in actual like landmarks. I read that from the Nick Bryant book.
Okay.
Because Nick Bryant got pulled over with Rusty Nelson, and the police had searched their car too, and they were essentially looking for those photos.
So
they knew who they were pulling over. They knew what they were investigating. And Nick Bryant had told the police officer, "Oh no, I'm just exploring. I'm just hiking or whatever." But they knew Rusty Nelson. They knew what was up.
before Gary Caradori, the legislative committee had another investigator named Jerry Lowe. He said that there was growing concern in the community and that they felt something needed to be done about this. He had found that Larry King was involved in guns and money transfers that were going into Nicaragua, and that there was involvement by the CIA and even possibly White House connections there as well. Mm. And it kind of seemed like Larry King's position at the bank was really just to allow him to have money at his disposal.
Of course.
So that he could do some sort of other business elsewhere that involved people that were more influential than just his little credit union connections.
Right.
And there's ample evidence that the Omaha police chief, Bob Wadman, who claimed and swore in court that he didn't know Larry that well, had actually stayed at Larry's home in Washington, D.C., which also... Larry has multiple homes on a $16,000 a year salary.
Right. Yeah, that's possible.
But, yeah.
Well, don't you have multiple homes?
For sure. I definitely do. So it appears like they This was all a carefully crafted orchestration in order to funnel children to certain homes, and then they would be used in the sex trafficking, drug trafficking ring for pornography.
It's not enough that kids that go into the foster care system are always, typically they get also funneled back into the prison system.
Oh, yeah.
That's not enough. Let's
No.
get them into child pornography, sex trafficking, drug trafficking. Just keep them down.
Just the most vulnerable of people.
Yep.
So in addition to King in Nebraska, there was a man named Craig Spence, who was a power broker in the Republican Party, a lobbyist who essentially played Larry King's role in Washington, D.C. Spence's home was wired for audiovisual blackmail, and it is guaranteed that anyone who took part in the goings-on at his home were blackmailed with what was taken in his little, like, he had his whole place was just set up for every little corner of the house was under video.
Surveillance.
So this was all obviously premeditated. Everything was calculated. It was planned out. Nothing happened by accident. And when they began to investigate Larry King, multiple people involved in his goings-ons, like people connected to him, disappeared or ran off to a different state or resigned from their positions that they held altogether.
Oh, wow. How crazy.
They said that they didn't know how high up it went, but there were multiple reports that George Bush Sr., like we talked about, was at these parties, and we know the Clintons were involved with the Epsteins. Who the fuck knows what the extent of that was, but I think that knowing that should at least make it a little more palatable to accept that there were powerful people taking part in this, and it's not some far-off idea that there were presidents or politicians or who the fuck else that took part in this.
Just because somebody's the president of the United States, it doesn't mean that you're
a judge or a cop. As we know, you get to these positions by just trampling probably over everyone else in your path, and a lot of them are psychopaths. So the Franklin Legislative Committee realized that they needed to start interviewing some of these victims instead of just getting secondhand information. And obviously, their interviews gave them a ton of information. The people that it implicated were all the same people that were being named over and over and over, which were Rusty Nelson, Deward Finch, the superintendent of schools, Rusty Nelson, all the people. The Webbs. And just before he died, Gary Caradori and his assistant Karen had gone to a women's reformatory in York, Nebraska, to interview 21-year-old Alicia Owen, who was incarcerated on a bad check conviction. They interviewed her for 3 hours, and she had said that she had been heavily involved with various prominent figures in Nebraska. She said that she was also involved with other minors and pornography, and that the adults abusing her included Police Chief Robert Wadman.
Wow, crazy.
Who she says was a pedophile.
Wow, what?
What? In her first interview, Owen stated that she met Larry King in 1983 when she was 14 years old. She met him through some boys that she knew who were at Boys Town, who invited her to a party sometime in August of 1983 at the Twin Towers penthouse, which we had already mentioned is where Larry King rented an apartment. So, she went to a party there, and she said that Larry was there, the chief of police was there, Robert Wadman, and multiple other men. And there were approximately 6 adults and 20 kids, female and male. And there was a professionally made pornography that was being played that showed 2 teenage males having sex. And that was what everybody was watching at the party.
Oh my God. Gross.
She saw Larry King and a young boy go into a bedroom. She saw a high-profile man, Alfie Allen, go into a bedroom multiple times with different boys. We'll talk about him again later. And she observed a 14-year-old boy sitting on a man, who we'll talk about again later, Harold Anderson's lap, which isn't normal, okay?
No,
not
a
normal.
14-year-old child shouldn't be sitting
On
on
some
a
strange
random
man's lap. So, she's giving names, she's telling investigators the story, she's giving specific events, dates, every single detailed bit of information that anybody is going to tell you is what gives legitimacy to her story.
She can't just be making this up out of the confines of her mind. She's not like, this sounds good.
They claim she did, but I don't know how and why she would be able to do that.
And she's also doing the exact same thing and naming the exact same people that Loretta was.
Exactly. So she went to a second party a month later, and she gave the specific date of that party, saying that it was either December 21st or 22nd of 1983, and it was at this party that Police Chief Robert Wadman said that she was pretty and asked her if she had anything on underneath her dress.
What the fuck?
She said sometime later that she sat on his lap, and he told her that he knew that she wasn't a virgin and started trying to feel her breasts and complimenting them, and then began to unzip her dress and touch her in a sexual way. She asked him to stop, and he grabbed her wrist very tight and twisted it and started asking her questions about if she knew what fellatio was, and told him that she needed to show him. And told her that she needed to show him. And she said that after that she began to cry and ran away and threw up, because obviously that's
Of course, it's
revolting.
disgusting.
She says that at the parties there were always sexual encounters that involved boys and girls. That Larry King was there generally. That generally Bob Wadman was there, and the superintendent of schools, Deward Finch. We've heard about a superintendent multiple times, and from other people. So she was describing this person that was going around at this party and taking photographs as a person that was around 27, blonde, with acne scars, and lo and behold, that is the exact description of none other than Rusty Nelson. Mm. So somehow she knew what he looked like. This same person that's involved in all these different people's situations.
How could she possibly know what he looks like?
I have no idea. But then Alicia said that she got pregnant when she was 15, and she said she knew that it was Police Chief Wadman who had impregnated her because she had specific dates. She said that August 7th, 10th, 12th, and 17th,
Jeez.
Robert Wadman raped her. She had specifics on where it had happened and the time, and that they timed perfectly with her getting pregnant, and that she didn't have sexual relations with anyone else.
Well, yeah, at 15, or how many people are you having sex with?
I mean, I guess if you're getting taken to sex parties, who knows?
Right.
But still, she claimed that she was positive it was his. She also talked about a man named Harold Anderson who liked young boys and had a regular boy that was 14 named Jeremy. She talked about the superintendent who lived approximately 40 miles from Omaha. She said he was gay, older, and balding. He had bad teeth and was approximately 6 feet tall, which is the exact description of Deward Finch, who was the superintendent. She said Danny King was another witness who said that he had sex with the same man. So that was another kid. Danny King had said he had sex with the same man, Finch.
Good.
Multiple survivors and witnesses reported that Judge Theodore Carlson was another man implicated in these rapes and molestations, and Alicia is no exception. She said that she went to a French restaurant one evening, a place where for some reason this molestation was taking place with multiple different parties, and this judge was waiting for her downstairs in the basement to perform oral sex on him. She said that Bob Wadman told her that Larry King owes him a lot and that he has done a lot for Larry King. She said that the Omaha mayor, P.J. Morgan, supplied a lot of drugs to these parties. Basically, everybody that's in the city is corrupt as fuck.
Yeah.
And she said that she always took plane trips to different cities, specifically to have sex with these men or go to these parties that had been set up by Larry King. There were also multiple other minors that would accompany with her. She was threatened with being murdered if she said anything about it or didn't do what they said. Somebody said that they would cut off her nipples if she didn't perform oral sex on them. That is so awful and terrifying. And anybody that went through any of this would be severely traumatized. And we're talking about a 15-year-old girl. And then later on, when she goes to tell her story, she's told that she didn't suffer the abuse, and she's lying.
She's lying.
And
She's
she
making
gets
the
sent
whole
to jail.
thing up, and she's got such an imagination, and she's trying to discredit people. It's so fucking gross.
What kind of world is this? Like, seriously, where you're abused like that and then you get punished for it after the fact for trying to say anything about it? It's unreal. Owen stated that the governor, Bob Carey, knew about all these activities that were going on as far as the child prostitution, and Larry King told her so. Which also, why would he tell her that if it wasn't true? Because who the fuck was she, you know? So that's the governor of the state at the time. They were also friends with Judge Carlson, who had been named multiple times, and the assistant Douglas County attorney, Tom McKinney, which really gives me a lot of faith in all of these fucking positions of power. These are super high power people in the town and in that county that are taking part in child abuse, sexual abuse, drug trafficking. I would say for anyone with a mind, like any sense in their mind, that they would think that's a troubling situation, that this is not something that we should just sweep under the rug. Because if you allow that to go on, like what the fuck else is going to go on? How would you have any faith in the justice system? Not like there's a lot to be had in the first place.
No.
But with this going on, I mean, everybody's corrupt. Everybody.
Everybody from the top down.
there was a social worker named Florence Davis that had been associated with all these various cases as well. They suspected that Florence was funneling kids into certain foster homes. She's a social worker, mind you. And the director of Omaha Children's Home came to the Franklin Legislature Committee with this information, saying that she had a meeting with Florence regarding some new children going to the Webb home. And she said that she didn't think it would be a good idea, that they shouldn't go to that home, and that she didn't think it was a good fit, and they were going to place... Oh, okay, and then this Florence lady said no matter what, they were going to go to the Webb home. They're not going to change their minds, period.
What
They're going to the Webb home.
Why? Why?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is, it wasn't even just the children. It's
right.
adults.
Right.
It's people who are noticing these patterns going on, and they're saying, wait a second, something is wrong here, and they're just getting brushed off. That is the sickest situation. How could you... I mean, of course there's people that are going to say it's a hoax, because at every turn you've got people trying to discredit every single aspect of this situation.
Yeah, no kidding. So Troy Bonner had a ton of stories that were generally the same as everyone else's. That they were used by certain men, they were taken to parties and chosen. There were certain men that would schedule to have them come to their apartment or at one of those apartments, such like the Twin Towers ones, where they would be used for sex. And then they would be given some small amount of money, just like with Epstein, and that there were police officers taking part. He also mentioned that they would get things like cocaine or heroin, just their drug of choice. There were people that ran the newspaper. There were like mayors. There were all sorts of people taking place in this, and all these kids were naming names. 4 separate individuals gave Gary Caradori video testimony.
21 hours total.
And were making serious and, again, corroborating allegations of abuse against all of these very prominent people in Omaha. And they all corroborated with each other time and time and time again. Places, people, things that were going on.
You can't deny that this is fucking serious. There's no way they could have schemed together.
No way.
And we didn't have technology like we do now.
So Gary Caradori interviewed these kids for hours and hours, 21 hours, like we just said. And the committee sent all of these tapes in. And when he interviewed people, he made extensive notes and listed multiple different sources that could be gone to for follow-up and corroboration. And then they delivered all of this to local, state, and federal law enforcement. So they all got copies of the interviews with the kids, the notes, witness statements, the entire investigation. And the Douglas County Sheriff, Dick Roth, said that he believed the victim witnesses. So the Franklin Committee has Gary Caradori already investigating and interviewing all of these victim witnesses, and everything's corroborating with each other. And that's when John DeCamp decided to write what has become known as the DeCamp memo.
With the memo, DeCamp was kind of going rock, flag, and eagle over these pedos.
What is that?
Rock, flag, and eagle. It's Always Sunny. It's Charlie. Okay. He named every single prominent name and everyone affiliated with the trafficking ring. He went on to say that in the case of Larry King and the cadre of people that he dealt with closely, boys and girls like Troy Bonner and Alicia Owen were used as drug couriers for a national program of illegal narcotics marketing. Essentially, they were just like throwaway kids, and that because they were 12 years or younger when they were doing this activity, they provided a perfect insulation blanket between the real drug czars like Larry King and Alan Baer and the law. So they were just toys, essentially. The rape was just an added bonus to these assholes. Something else that I wanted to add here was when DeCamp wrote this memo, Senator Schmidt was asking him for legal advice on how he should proceed. And DeCamp told Schmidt that he needed to go way above the police, that he needed to go to as high up as he could possibly go to report this stuff so that it couldn't be covered up by anybody. And he specifically was talking about the charges against Police Chief Robert Wadman, who was now being accused of molesting multiple children and impregnating one, and had already obviously covered up an investigation into some of the abuse from Loretta earlier.
But how can you how can you go high up and cover and just so something's not covered up when that person is
you can't
just as likely to cover something up?
I think that's unfortunately what they found was that they couldn't go high up enough because the higher up they went, there were still people involved.
So together they went to talk to the regional head of the FBI, Nick O'Hara, and he stopped them after they began to give their case against Robert Wadman, telling them that Chief Wadman was probably one of the closest friends in the whole wide world to him.
Aww.
And that anyone accusing him would be taking on the FBI.
So our child molesting trash bin chief, Robert Wadman, is being defended by the head of the FBI in this area. Are you fucking kidding me right now? Does this mean that the regional head of the FBI, Nick O'Hara, was completely unaware of this huge and not very well hidden aspect of his best friend in the world's life?
No.
Does it mean that he was not a very good detective? Or does it mean that he's fine if his BFF rapes kids and he just shuts up about it?
Yes, that's it.
Or was the then regional head of the FBI, Nick O'Hara, also raping kids?
Probably that too.
Yeah.
So in the memo, he concludes by saying, Bill Colby, you were right. It is too big. I am too small. They're too huge and powerful and go up too high in business and government for me to touch them or do anything about it. Yes, it is something that I should have abandoned a long time ago and faced up to the fact that good does not always triumph and that evil with many faces does sometimes succeed.
Oh, that is so just defeating, man.
It's so heartbreaking. Again, how do you have hope? Around this time, the Omaha World Herald began immediately publishing their newspaper, all this stuff to discredit these victim witnesses, Gary Caradori, John DeCamp, Senator Schmidt, essentially everybody that was coming out against all of these prominent people that are being named as abusers and this
in the ring.
child sex ring.
Which we talk about him a lot in this episode, but the Omaha World Herald is a garbage bin. Garbage bin. They're still, to this day, a year ago. I'll talk about it later.
Isn't Citron a part of that, the Omaha World Herald?
Yeah.
Okay. And we now know that a former publisher of the paper and one of its lead writers are both named by all of these kids multiple times for being part of this sex ring. So it's hilarious that I said that because that's
Citron,
him.
yeah.
So this pedo-ridden paper, at least at the time, the Omaha World Herald, is the only paper published statewide. And here they are disseminating misinformation when they have ties to the accused.
I mean, it's a constant conflict of interest everywhere you turn.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Which is pretty much the entire case, though.
Yeah, that's true.
Omaha, Nebraska had a conflict of interest with prosecuting pedos because they were also...
Because everyone in Omaha... Not everyone. There's so many people in Omaha that were being pedos left and right.
Right. Anyway, the citizens of Nebraska are led to believe these kids, who, we'll say it a few more times, all had corroborating stories, names, and dates, are making everything up in some real Ocean's 11 type shit. But Caradori was really worried about the safety of the witnesses of the victims who had come out and made statements against these people, and had wanted them to get them into some sort of protected environment. There's 2 senators, a sheriff, the representative of the Douglas County District Court, and a judge, and Gary Caradori, who all had to hold a secret meeting in this auto body shop one evening to meet about how they may be able to get protection for these victims.
That's pathetic. You're talking about a fucking child sex trafficking ring, and in order to be able to investigate it without people interfering, you have to secretly meet with these people?
That's terrible.
Oh!
And honestly, they all said it was hopeless because they couldn't get anywhere because somewhere along the chain there was somebody that was going to stop them. Like the head of the FBI who was best friends with the sheriff of the chief of police.
Blech. So Paul Benassi, we'll start to talk about him a little bit. Paul, to Gary Caradori, he told him that he knew Alicia Owen, he knew Troy Bonner, he knew Danny King. He was able to tell him the last time that he saw each of them, what year it was. He also said that he'd been a victim of a man named Alan Baer, a guy that we just mentioned in the Franklin scandal. Peter Citron from the Omaha World Herald, who Bianca just talked about. He was one of the top reporters. Bob Wadman was named by Paul. Larry King, obviously. Harold Anderson, who was the former publisher of the Omaha World Herald. And then that Judge Carlson. He named all of these same names that we've heard from Alicia, from Troy, from Danny, from the Webb kids, from Loretta. It's absolutely insane how they can name... and I say it so many times, I know. But, like, how can this be possible? That they name the same fucking people over and over. Totally unrelated kids.
But fuck. I get so excited. I get like tongue tied. It's not like they had fucking cell phones to text each other and be like, hey, talk about this. There was this that didn't exist.
No.
These kids are seemingly unconnected.
Right. It's absolutely absurd to, that's why I'm saying it's Ocean's 11 shit. If you're seriously trying to tell me they pulled this off.
No.
So, Paul said that he'd been on at least 200 trips that he had taken specifically at Larry King's order to have sex with these men. He'd gone to California, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Miami, Houston, Austin, Tampa, Lincoln, basically every city in America. There's a lot of Texas there, though. I'm not real happy about that.
Right.
And had Larry King delivering every city in America essentially had Larry King delivering young boys and girls to them for grown-ass people to have sex with them. Paul had gone to the Omaha police about being abused by these specific people long before the Franklin Credit Union was under investigation by the legislative committee or anyone else. There are a lot of people that try to discredit him and say that he was coming forwards for some kind of notoriety because the situation went public, but he was trying to get help from being a victim of abuse long before it.
Yes.
Paul also said that he had attempted suicide many times due to the horrific abuse that he had suffered, and it really drove home to me that Paul was terrified of Larry King and what he called his, quote, people, and the situations that these kids would describe, which are so fucking terrifying. Like, they were just being threatened with extreme violence to perform sexual acts on people, to run these drugs for people, to collect other children for this to happen to them. And then their lives are threatened when it's all said and done as well. It's just absolutely horrible. And they're so afraid of these people coming back to kill them that some of them could barely even shower by themselves or go to sleep by themselves. These are just little kids, and they couldn't even be alone because they were so terrified that these men were going to come back and kill them. And then the authorities are telling them they're lying, and I just can't stand it. I cannot stand it.
So we discussed this in the Patreon episode about Johnny Gosch, because Paul Benassi was also linked to the Johnny Gosch case, and he had actually been diagnosed with what we know now as dissociative identity disorder. And it's not a psychosis, it's a neurosis that is brought on by having to endure, especially at such a young age, such horrific, brutal abuse, that you begin to kind of develop this disorder as a coping mechanism, just in order to be able to handle your life and to be able to even remotely try to go on living without just killing yourself, which, like she just said, he tried to do multiple times. And the World Herald and the prosecutor for the grand jury all tried to make him out to be just this crazy lying kid with multiple personalities or dissociative identity disorder. Well, it was multiple personality disorder at the time. What did he have, though, to gain by lying?
Yeah.
He was just putting himself out there in order to get more accusations thrown at him.
Yeah, he literally got nothing out of it. No money, nothing whatsoever.
He was granted money. Did he get it? No. And how did he know all those details about the White House where they took the kids and the place beneath the floor where they would keep them and the birthmarks on Johnny Gosch, or all of the same exact details as the 3 other witnesses and the foster children in the late 80s?
Right. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
No.
He said that while child abuse went on, Larry King would just be sitting there laughing and smiling and videotaping while Rusty Nelson went around taking photos. John DeCamp, after doing so much investigation and interviewing of actual victims in the Franklin case, had so much evidence that at the time, an entire room in this building was filled with his evidence, his notes, everything. He had around 10 names for every single person that you could follow up with to verify what they had to say. So, at the conclusion of the grand jury, after all this fucking evidence, a room full of evidence, they came to the conclusion that it was all a carefully crafted hoax. Hello, Danny Ocean, are you there? The 5 prominent accused individuals were exonerated by the grand jury, stating that they found no credible evidence of child sexual abuse, interstate transportation of minors, drug trafficking, or participation in a pornography ring. Did they happen to peruse the room full of evidence the Franklin Committee had compiled, or did they just hear the testimonies of the defense? It's really fucking mind-boggling that you can go through all of that evidence and then say,
Nah.
not a lot of credible stuff here. They also actually indicted 3 people who had allegations of abuse against them, who were Alan Baer, Peter Citron, and Jared Webb, who we knew from the Webb household. And why are some of these people who were named in these allegations, why are some of their stories to be believed while others are not? Why are certain people guilty and other people aren't? Why do we believe that these 3 people who were named over and over and over, along with all these other people, were actually guilty of this stuff, but Larry King who didn't even get subpoenaed for this, by the way, was totally innocent. So Larry King, the central figure in this entire case, the police chief, Robert Wadman, and the Judge Carlson, those guys didn't do what the kids were claiming, but these other 3 guys who they named just right along with them did do it. It doesn't make any sense. They charged Webb off of Nellie Patterson's testimony, yet her testimony about traveling around with Larry King for his parties wasn't to be believed. They were picking and choosing information to believe and not to believe in the same testimony from the same person. And it seemed like that they were really just going after the low-hanging fruit as the ones that got charged, and the ones that would create too much kerfuffle were to not be believed. The grand jury actually blamed Carol Stitt of the Foster Care Review Board, saying that she didn't do what she was supposed to do.
Oh my God.
When we read that she was really pushing and pushing and pushing for somebody to do something. She really went out of her way.
was trying to get somebody to do something.
I mean, they went and brought evidence multiple times, and everybody just ignored her, and they were just trying to push the blame off on everybody else. They said Loretta suffered more abuse and neglect than anyone should endure, but that the perpetrators of her abuse may never be known.
She said who the perpetrators were.
Even though she...
Oh, sorry.
No, it's cool. Even though she named a million names and gave physical descriptions of people. Physical descriptions that matched exactly. Okay, so then the grand jury casually went on to mention that the Omaha Police Department said that there were over 500 known pedophiles in the Omaha area, and that the U.S. Department of Justice estimates that the typical pedophile molests 77 children before they were caught. So that's around 38,500 children abused in the Omaha area.
Oh my God.
It's a ton of children in this area, and we already know that we have at least a handful of children who are claiming to be abused by these same people that we're discounting with this grand jury. They said that there was one pedophile that caused them great concern, and that was Robert Anderson. They stated he was of concern, but then they said next that because nobody testified against him, that they could not indict him.
I'm going crazy.
I don't understand.
Why would you be concerned about somebody and say, well, but nobody's accused them, we can't.
What they failed to mention was that Robert Anderson figured prominently in the testimony of Troy Bonner and Danny King. But they're just like, well, nobody said anything about him, so we just have to let him go. But he does scare us. Like, what's the fucking point? So they posited that this hoax was spread by 2 rumor mongers that were childcare workers.
Why would childcare workers even do that?
Help me. When in reality, these childcare workers had just gained the trust of these kids enough for them to share this horrible abuse that they were enduring with them. They attacked Senator Schmidt of the Franklin Committee. They attacked Senator Chambers. They attacked the journalist Michael Casey, who was writing about the case. And the grand jury came out and publicly cleared by name all of the abusers that were prominently named as abusers in these testimonies, which is very, very atypical. And then about Chief Robert Wadman, who multiple children named as their abuser, who Alicia Owen said raped and impregnated her. The grand jury said that they now looked upon Alicia Owen as the perpetrator and Wadman as the victim. Why?
How?
Because she had gotten in trouble for bad checks, and that somehow discredits her allegations of extreme sexual abuse? Because, like, that's the only fucking thing that I can see here.
I have never heard of a case where an adult police officer was the victim of a 15-year-old child. I've never heard that before. That's
absurd.
Absolutely upside down.
I mean, these people need to be...
What the fuck?
So the foreman of this grand jury stated to the Franklin Committee that the prosecutor on the case and his assistant helped them write their report, which is illegal. They're not supposed to have anything to do with the writing of this report and the determination of the grand jury. They claimed that Owen's testimony of Larry King's right-hand man, the kid who she had spoken about multiple times in her reports, was a completely fabricated person. I don't know how you would ever determine that. And they did not explain how a completely fictitious person could appear in the reports from at least 4 different children. His little right-hand man, over a period of 3 years, because it not only appeared in Alicia Owen's report, but it also appeared in Loretta's report. It appeared in one of the Webb children's report as well, and then Paul Bonassi's. So this person that they say is completely made up has been reported from at least 4 different people somehow, and yet they're still saying he made it up.
Yeah.
The grand jury did not even read Caradori's evidence before they made their claim that it was a carefully crafted hoax. He had well over 291 potential witnesses that could help support the four witnesses' claims.
He's got 200. Oh my God, you've got 300 people that can support these claims?
Yes, but the grand jury was fine talking to just 75 people that they chose and being done with it. They just wanted to hurry up and wash their hands of this whole situation before the news of the DA and the judge and the cop raping little kids in sleazy apartments got all over town. Which it already was, but, apparently everybody seemed to be okay with just trying to sweep it under the rug. Clearly, the grand jury had an agenda, which was to discredit the kids and anyone else making allegations. The Legislative Franklin Committee wrote in response to the grand jury's report that, we assume from their choice of words, carefully crafted hoax, that the grand jury was persuaded that the testimony of the witnesses corroborated each other and included facts and circumstances which were readily verifiable and attested to by other witnesses. Otherwise, it could not be logically deemed carefully crafted. If it was carefully crafted, who crafted it? And when did they do so? Right. Basically, the grand jury is saying it's good enough that it sounds legit, so that's why it's a carefully crafted hoax, but it simply can't be true because we don't want to believe it. It also stated that Alicia Owen and Paul Bonacci were charged with perjury, while Troy Bonner and Danny King were not, as we see. The victims who stand by their story were charged with perjury, while those who admitted to making false statements before the committee are completely exonerated, which makes little to no sense.
Zero.
Either all of them should be indicted or none of them should be indicted. The message is mixed, and it appears to favor encouraging recanting as a way to avoid the hazards of criminal prosecution. They said that they hope that the wild tale about prostitution and cover-up had been laid to rest by the grand jury. So the guy who led the prosecution for the grand jury was named Samuel Van Pelt. We all know if you have a van, whatever, it's bad news most of the time. And he was leaking information to the public. He was burying crucial evidence, and he was accused of threatening witnesses.
Great.
Van Pelt had previously been accused of covering up the state police SWAT team's murder of a political activist, Arthur King, in 1984.
I don't understand how if you're accused of covering up certain things, why are you allowed to continue doing this particular job?
It's a corrupt system,
It doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't, but it's corrupt. So, when he was appointed as the head of this prosecution for the grand jury on the Franklin case, the public itself was pretty outraged by that, to begin with, because he was already known to be a corrupt individual. Well, that really gives me a lot of faith in this system.
Right.
The fact that there were a number of victim witnesses who were telling the Franklin Committee after the grand jury hearing that this man, who was the lead for the prosecution, was threatening them, telling them that if they continued to tell their story, that they were going to be in big trouble. And he repeated this to a number of the children who were giving testimony to the grand jury
Gosh.
But Alicia Owen refused to recant her story.
Good for her.
Same with Paul Bonacci, and both of them were, like we said just now, punished for that. Unfortunately, Danny King and Troy Bonner both were convinced to recant, but we'll hear later that they then take that back again later because they were intimidated.
By the FBI.
Yes.
A juror who remains anonymous said that Van Pelt had told her how to testify and why she needed to do it that way, and threatened her with situations in her past in order to make her testify the way he wanted her to, which that's not how I would hope a grand jury is going.
No.
But, and if the prosecutor has that much power in the grand jury, what the fuck is the good of a grand jury?
Really, I really don't understand it.
Because this entire trial was so corrupt, an investigation was actually started into Van Pelt and the grand jury, and the person who was appointed to investigate this was Robert Siegler, who was a person that was named by multiple victims and in the Franklin case as one of the men who took part of these parties.
Fuck my life.
So,
everywhere you turn.
Obviously, no child rapists are going to be taken to task by another pedo. Following the release of his book in 1992, DeCamp was threatened to be destroyed by various lawsuits from many of the prominent names in the book. But in the end, none of them ever even made it to a lawsuit, let alone disbar or, quote, destroy him. They gave public statements to news stations, clutching pearls and claiming the book was libelous and slanderous, and DeCamp ought to be ashamed of himself. But not these rapists, that was fine.
No. In fact, the only lawsuit resulted from DeCamp himself when a news station, WECT, in North Carolina attacked DeCamp and the credibility of his book, and when he demanded a retraction and apology, they simply doubled down and said that they were going to repeat the attacks.
Good.
They said that they had investigated by speaking to goddamn Bob Kerrey, that old governor who Larry King had told Alicia Owen knew all about this child sex ring. And they also consulted with the brand new, at the time, Wilmington police chief, none other than Bob Wadman. Are you fucking kidding me?
Oh my God, this guy.
How does this happen?
How
does this happen? Anyway, DeCamp was a smart guy, and he once again demanded a retraction and apology, and he told them that he was ready to defend every word in the book, and they better be ready for his wrath if they didn't comply. They soon turned tail, issued an apology and a retraction, and paid him damages. So, obviously, they were like,
well, maybe, never mind.
Right. Due to various shitty circumstances with Robert Wadman, the public waged war against his position as police chief for well over 2 years, thank goodness, until he finally resigned in 1994. In 1992, Monsignor Robert Hupp, who had been head of Boys Town since the early 70s, wanted to meet with DeCamp, a meeting DeCamp assumed would go a certain way, which I think you would all expect it to go.
To go one way, but...
Yes. Contrary to his suspicions, the Monsignor told him, "Your book stated the game. I hope I can help with some of the players."
Which is crazy because we expected it to go the other way.
Right.
Hupp told him apologetically that he felt like he was the wife who did not know and about the goings-on, and he was the last to find out. He went on to say that when he did finally suspect something and tried to help, the Archbishop, Daniel Sheehan, elected to do nothing about it.
Oh, really?
And then, when he came upon more horrifyingly evil circumstances, public officials and the church would do nothing because they were terrified of the damage it would do to the church and the city of Omaha. Because we don't make pedophile jokes at the Catholic Church's expense already.
Yeah,
I mean...
It's, where there's smoke, there's fire, young men. When DeCamp pressed him about whether there were specific stories in the book that he felt resonated more strongly than others, the Monsignor said it was a story from Elkhorn, Nebraska that took place in 1985.
According to Hupp, a young boy named Shattuck had been sexually assaulted, abused, and killed. Hupp was certain that the man who killed the boy was a member of the Catholic clergy and provided detail which provided beyond a shadow of a doubt that this person that he named was in fact his murderer.
Which isn't so far out, and if you've watched The Keepers on Netflix, then you know that they're not against murder to cover up some stuff. Yeah.
Hupp said, quote, The church is plagued by these sexual abuse problems across the country and plagued by the devastating publicity the clergy abuse incidents have caused. The church's reaction to these sexual abuse problems is, in most cases, to immediately get the clergy member involved out of the state and, if possible, out of the country.
Just scooch them all over to somewhere else, please.
Yep, so they can abuse children in other countries. Amazing. And hopefully into treatment. And I had to wonder, what treatment? To what end? The treatment for pedophilia should not mean that they're going to get to be in another place of power in order to abuse little boys and girls again.
Right, like The Keepers, the guy he was abusing girls, so they moved him to a boys' school where he was abusing, or maybe he was abusing boys, and then they moved him to a girls' school, and then he was abusing girls, and he was bringing in police officers and judges and other prominent members in society to come rape these girls in his office at the church. And I absolutely 100% believe those
100%.
victims that they came out on that documentary. Anyway. After Hupp determined that the Omaha Archdiocese was going to do nothing, he went to the FBI and Omaha authorities, who then also did absolutely nothing.
So that comes as a shock to 0% of you, I'm sure. And the murderer who Hupp said he believed killed the child, he was shipped out of state for alcohol treatment right after the murder.
Oh.
Super convenient.
Oh, I have an alcohol problem. That's why I was molesting children. So eventually, Hupp was forced out of his position at the boys' town, and that did not stop him from speaking out about the situation, as a year following his removal from his post, he repeated his claims on the BBC documentary Conspiracy of Silence, which you should all find and watch if you have any interest in this case whatsoever.
So he lived quietly in West Omaha, Nebraska until his death at 88 in 2003.
About 1 year following the release of DeCamp's book, a British television station had a deal with the Discovery Channel to do a documentary on the Franklin scandal and DeCamp's book, which is The Conspiracy of Silence.
It was scheduled to be released on May 3rd of 1994, but influential members of Congress applied pressure to the cable industry to stop the airing of the program and destroy all copies. The Discovery Channel and Yorkshire TV, which was that British-based television station, were reimbursed for the $250,000 to $500,000 that they had spent in production costs.
Jesus, and it was never aired.
Mm-mm.
In 1995, DeCamp received an anonymous copy in the mail and was not surprised at all that it never aired after he watched it. He said, for example, the documentary team had interviewed Troy Bonner, who completely guilt-stricken over his recanting after Gary Caradori's death, which is what happened. Gary Caradori died in that obviously not natural plane crash, and the FBI came to talk to Troy and pressured him to recant his whole story about everything that had gone on it with this sex ring. But obviously he felt terrible about this later because he came to tell DeCamp in a recorded affidavit in painstaking detail to what exactly had happened and that he was lying about it not happening, which is awful. It was later discovered by DeCamp that the crew never expected the links to Franklin to go so high up in government as they did, which we don't even know half of.
Right.
Additionally, when the copy of the documentary was sent to America, Customs confiscated it. I knew I was going to have trouble saying that. Customs confiscated it as being pornographic material. An attorney spent months editing and deleting aspects of the documentary so that it would be finally cleared for broadcast. So that did not make a lot of sense. They did this. They met very specific criteria over months and months and months of editing and going back and forth to make sure that they were going to be able to air and it would be okay to air and it wouldn't be pornographic. And yet somehow, whenever it came into America, it was confiscated for being pornographic. It seems like there's probably something else going on there. America's Most Wanted spent some time dedicated to the Franklin situation also. They interviewed Paul Bonacci at length and another boy who corroborated all of Paul's details, like the home in Colorado and being branded.
In the documentary, which you can find on YouTube, and I think it's like it's called Documentary Heaven. You can find Conspiracy of Silence. Yeah. But Paul Bonacci was sent to lure kids from Boys Town who were 10 years old and older. And Peter Citron, who we talked about from the Omaha Herald or whatever the fuck it's called.
Omaha World Herald.
Took boys that were 8 to 13 years old. He would participate in fondling them and performing oral sex with them. He would have anal sex with some of the older boys. Alan Bear wanted sex from these boys from Boys Town. He would touch them. He would have sadistic acts performed. Like Troy Bonner said that he had some of them insert a squash.
Oh my God.
Into them. He did things like cattle prodding to them. Larry King had the same tendencies, but his were actually more violent. They also provided young girls, including Alicia Owen, and these kids would do sexual acts and then be provided their drug of choice, like I said earlier. And the FBI completely tore down the victims, making them out to be the criminals and liars.
Unreal.
Like Ashley said, the FBI pressured Troy Bonner to say that he and Alicia had concocted the entire story.
And they just took that and ran with it.
They're like,
that
oh,
was
okay.
The only thing they heard.
Yep. The grand jury actually ruled that Larry King had paid young boys for sex, fraud, and embezzlement, but there was no sex ring. They indicted Alan Bear for pandering for sex, but denied that he had any connection with Larry King or Citron.
Wow.
And they said that Troy Bonner and Alicia had been abused terribly, but not by the people who they identified.
That was one of my favorite things. This did happen to you, but those people that you named, they could not have done
That
this.
wasn't them.
It couldn't have been them. They're my friend.
They're my friend. And because like Ashley said, because she refused to withdraw her evidence, they charged Alicia Owen with perjury for 9 to 25 years. She served 4, but still,
I mean,
that's
a long fucking time.
That's a long fucking time. They only indicted Larry King for, I think, 15 years.
And they can't even prove that she perjured herself. They can't even remotely at all prove that.
hold on. 15 years for $40 million.
Yeah, and she had 5.
And she had...
Or 4.
They convicted her for 9 to 25.
Yeah.
It's
just ridiculous.
That's such a high...
They said it was unheard of at the time.
Yes, they did.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Cool. So, America's Most Wanted eventually told DeCamp they were going to have to cool it on the Franklin topic until he could get some solid charges going, as they worked closely with the FBI. Essentially, they were the only way that they had a show, and, you can't work with the FBI and accuse child molesters of covering up a sex trafficking ring, because those are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, what? When he attempted to review the evidence collected by the Franklin Investigative Committee, DeCamp was told that a great deal of the evidence had been somehow destroyed and that they did not know how. And what was left had to be reviewed with a chaperone, essentially. Then, after a little while, they wanted all evidence destroyed.
Of course they did.
And it was. Which, holy fuck, dude. I'm talking, years and just so much evidence of this stuff. And of course they have to destroy it because it's implicating so many people. Of course. So later in his life, DeCamp would reside in a veterans nursing home in Norfolk, Nebraska, where he would pass away in early August 2017. At the end of his life, he suffered from Parkinson's and a number of other illnesses, but will remain a fucking true blue national hero to us ladies at Keep It Real.
So we talked about the strange circumstances surrounding a lot of the people that were involved in the case's death. Mm-hmm. And here they are. Troy Bonner walked into a hospital one night screaming, they're after me because of this book. He was sedated and monitored, and he was found later in the morning in his room, sitting in his chair, bleeding from the mouth.
What the fuck?
Dead.
What the fuck, dude? Oh, he died in a hospital room, bleeding from the mouth? Mm-hmm. Oh my god.
Sean Bonner, Troy's brother, was found dead after playing Russian roulette.
And I think that was actually before Troy died.
Yes, it was.
I think that's what scared the shit out of him.
Yes.
And made him recant a little bit more. And they claimed, he was playing Russian roulette. It definitely seems like he was intimidated by killing his brother. But,
right. Craig Spence,
the Washington, D.C. pimp,
turned up dead 3 months after a June 29, 1989 Washington Times article which exposed a callboy operation from within the White House. Mm-hmm. This was ruled a suicide. Friends said he was carrying out homosexual blackmail operations for the CIA.
For the CIA, huh?
Mm-hmm. William Colby, that former CIA director who was helping DeCamp research his book, was said to have died from a boating excursion at night. Something his wife said he never did.
His wife was claiming this was hinky as fuck.
Mm-hmm. Bill Baker, who was a restaurant owner in Omaha and was a partner with Larry King in gay porn operations, was found shot in the back of the head.
This is like fucking the end of Sons of Anarchy or something. Just killing everybody.
Newt Koppel was a confidential informant for Garrett Caradori. He was also a key activist fighting the Franklin Cover-Up. He was said to have suddenly and unexpectedly died in his sleep at age 70. Claire Howard, who was the former secretary of Alan Baer, arranged his pedophile trysts, was said to have died in her sleep in 1991. Mike Lewis, a caregiver for victim witness Loretta Smith, was said to have died from a severe diabetic reaction at age 32.
32, huh?
Joe Malik, who was an associate of Larry King and the owner of Peony Park, where there were gay galas held.
gay galas!
Was found dead from a gunshot wound and was ruled a suicide. Aaron Owen, brother of Alicia Owen, was found hanging in his cell in Lincoln, Nebraska, just hours before one of his sister's court appearances.
You cannot fucking tell me that is a coincidence, that he is hung hours before she's set to testify.
Charlie Rogers, who was a reputed partner of Larry King, he was said to have been talking of being scared for his life in the days leading up to his death, and his head was blown off with a shotgun. That was ruled a suicide. Dan Ryan, who was an associate of Larry King, was found strangled or suffocated in his car. Bill Skoleski, who was an officer in the Omaha Police Department, was believed to have been keeping a file on Larry King and supposedly died of a heart attack. Kathleen Sorensen, who was the foster parent of Nellie and Kimberly Webb, was an outspoken activist against Satanism and died in a mysterious car crash. Curtis Tucker was an associate of Larry King. He fell or was pushed out of a high window in the Omaha Holiday Inn.
Oh, he just fell out that window. It's really easy to do that.
It is. At a hotel. Mm-hmm. Harmon Tucker was a school superintendent in Nebraska and Iowa, and his death had signs of satanic ritual murder.
Maybe.
He was found dead in Georgia near the plantation, which Harold Anderson and FBI Chief Nicholas O'Hara used for hunting.
Oh.
And finally, our hero.
God damn it.
Gary Caradori was going to meet with a source who would provide him with photos that would prove that Nebraskan children were being used for sexual gratification of important political leaders. He called his wife and said he had them, and returning on July 11th, he died in a nefarious plane crash.
Which we talked about earlier, which makes no sense. And that is a staggering number of people who have died under just absolutely bizarre circumstances. There's a couple in there that you could say, maybe that was what really happened. Mm-hmm. And then the rest are fucking out of this world. Like, that is, if that doesn't show you right there that there's something going on here, that something really truly did happen here, then you're too dense for me to even care to make a point to.
Right.
So months ago, we received an email from an individual who wished to remain anonymous, simply for their own safety, not because they're not standing behind the information that they provided us, but they worked for a local weekly reader in Omaha, and right after this situation happened, and they had a lot to tell me, and I wanted to read their email right now. They say, I came across your podcast yesterday when I searched for the Franklin Credit Union. About once a year, I look for new information about the scandal. I didn't live in Omaha when it happened, but I later worked in the Omaha media community, and I thought I'd share with you my experience with the scandal from the viewpoint of an outsider who has lived where it happened for 26 years. I don't really have any inside or additional information about the scandal, as people in Omaha don't like to talk about it at all.
Of course they don't.
However, over the years, I've had encounters with a few people named in the scandal and mentioned on your podcast. I thought you might be interested in the insight I have about these characters from personal experience. As a side note, earlier this year, the Omaha World Herald ran an article about the scandal's mention on HBO's True Detective. As you can see, the Omaha World Herald is still calling the Franklin scandal a hoax in 2019, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah, they did. Many of the names below have been changed. I moved to Nebraska in 93 when I was 19. 4 or 5 years later, I started working as a freelance writer for the local alternative news weekly, The Reader. A few months later, I was hired full-time as an assistant editor overseeing the local news section. At that time, there was a wave of bank robberies throughout the city, which I was looking into. In my investigation, I stumbled on some old articles on microfiche about the Franklin Credit Union scandal. I'd never heard of it, and it seemed intriguing, so I started asking questions around the newspaper. All I got was silence. The most anyone would say about it was that it was a weird deal that happened several years ago. That was strange. This was a newspaper, and these are Omahans. They love to talk about anything, especially Omaha. I even asked the editor-in-chief, Jack, about it, and he said there was nothing there to report on. The one person who told me it was a weird deal was an editor named Mike, not really his real name, who had moved there from Minnesota after the scandal and cover-up. Hey, Minnesota. Were over, but before I'd moved to Omaha. I didn't know him much, and at the time I was very intimidated by the locally well-known people on our staff. But I made a point to make friends with Mike since he seemed to be the only one who might talk about the Franklin scandal. So it was like a little reporter and them knew that they needed to kind of befriend some of these people so they could try to get a little bit more information. Once I knew him better, I did follow up with Mike about the subject. He said he'd done some checking into it, as I had, and he'd been completely stonewalled. In fact, after he started asking about it, the police department refused to talk to him for any article.
Wow.
Which is why I was assigned the city beat. Essentially, Mike told me not to go there if I wanted to stay at the paper. Not in a threatening way, but rather as a caution because of what he'd experienced. This was my first job in journalism, my chosen field, so I backed off. I still had questions, of course. Jack seemed gung-ho on covering crime and delving into investigative journalism, so it was odd that he wouldn't chase this story.
Yeah, no kidding.
And it was very pertinent at the time. You know, like, this was in the 90s. This was in the early 90s, right after it happened. So It's not like... Anyway. So they continue. After I'd been at the Reader close to a year, I had figured out that Jack was all talk. He wouldn't let me approach any story that might cast a negative light on the Omaha Police Department, the city government, or Omaha as a whole. He also was very concerned with what the Omaha World Herald thought of us and what and with maintaining a good relationship with the Omaha World-Herald, which is a garbage paper. We were at the city's alternative news weekly in an age when alt news weeklies were becoming known for their investigative journalism that blew the lid off major city and state scandals. It would have been perfect. Moreover, everyone at the Reader made fun of the Omaha World-Herald's tepid reporting and unwillingness to sweep any kind of scandal under the rug. Jack's concern with playing nice with the police department and Omaha World-Herald just didn't make sense. I'm not implying that Jack had anything to do with the Franklin scandal. I'm confident he wasn't involved. I do, however, believe that he knew it was dangerous for us to touch on the subject, so he made us stay away from it. Yikes, dude. Fast forward about a year and a half to 2000, and Jack was deservedly ousted from the Reader. Mike became the editor-in-chief, and I became managing editor. The paper was struggling financially due to mismanagement, and the publisher sold the Reader to someone whose name you'll recognize, Alan Baer. I'd heard Alan's name in regard to his business savvy and his philanthropy. And his philanthropy supporting the arts in Omaha. I knew he was a Brandis heir. The Brandis family was wealthy and had been influential in Omaha since the late 1800s. J.L. Brandis opened the Brandis department stores, precursors to Dillard's, who we talked about and you didn't know, and Yonkers, and that was really all they knew about Alan Baer. When our business manager announced that she was putting in her 2 weeks' notice because her in-laws would go nuts if she worked for Alan Baer, I of course had questions. She didn't tell me much, but she said that he was a pedophile. He had been involved in the Franklin Credit Union scandal and had been charged in the case. So that sent me digging again. At this point, I didn't yet know that the Franklin scandal involved more than 40 million gone missing and maybe some drug trafficking as well. I think one question that naysayers have always asked when trying to disprove the Franklin credit scandal is how the ring could have transported children and drugs. Omaha's Eppley airfield hardly seems like it would have been the place, although commercial flights don't fly in and out of Eppley 24 hours a day like at large airports. The last flights usually arrive around midnight, later if they've been delayed, and I think commercial flights only fly out between 5 a.m. and 11 p.m. So you could argue that they used Eppley during its down hours. But there's another possibility, and it's one I suspect was used. There's a small private airfield amid the acres of cornfields about 15 miles north of Omaha, between Omaha and Blair. It's on a poorly lit highway, and there were only a few homes nearby. This is where some people store their private jets and fly out of. In early 1994, I lived in Nebraska for about 6 months in Blair. It's disgusting. It's a disgusting little town. Sorry, everybody that lives there, filled with secrets and incest and drugs. I had unknowingly gotten mixed up with some people who I later learned were involved in a sizable drug ring run by a prominent Blair family member, which was the main source of methamphetamine and other drugs in the area, including Omaha. I later learned from people involved in the ring that the little airport in the middle of nowhere was how drugs were transported to the area. And we know there was drug trafficking going on with this sex ring, and obviously drug trafficking ring. Now, my experience with these people turned terrifying quickly, and I'm fully willing to admit that I might be making a connection between them and the Franklin scandal, simply because both are terrifying, so feel free to take the following with a grain of salt. With the rumors of the Franklin ring, transporting children and trafficking drugs, and my knowledge of this large drug ring in Blair, I have to wonder whether the two were connected. Moreover, Blair has always had a close relationship with neighboring Fort Calhoun, which sits between North Omaha and Blair, but on the opposite side of Blair than the airfield. We know that Fort Calhoun school superintendent was involved in the Franklin scandal, so I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that these people from Blair may have been involved with the Franklin people in some capacity. And when I say the drug ring in Blair was terrifying, I'm not exaggerating. 2 of the people I was caught up with before I knew anything about the ring are dead, stemming from an incident I was present at one night. I moved to Omaha 2 months later, but I was followed for nearly a year everywhere I went. These people threatened me in person, they visited my mother at our home, and they threatened her and my siblings. I haven't talked about it in 25 years. Wow. Except for telling my 2 very closest friends, and even telling them I left out all the identifying details. I don't think the drug ring still exists, but I also don't feel like being watched again if it does, so I've kept quiet. I left the Reader eventually and switched my career focus to marketing, but I continued to write for the paper, and I stayed in touch with those people who remained on staff. Soon after I left the paper, I started doing more digging into the Franklin scandal and Alan Baer. The internet was much more ubiquitous by then, and finding websites with such information was becoming easier. I was appalled at what I learned about the scandal and the ways Alan Baer was supposedly implicated. As you know, it's the stuff of nightmares. 21 years later, I still find the Franklin scandal intriguing. Based on my experience with the absolute silence surrounding the scandal, I do believe the information you've reported is true. I believe Larry King ran a child sex trafficking ring, and I believe it implicated people in the highest ranks of the federal government. People around my age typically have vague memories of the scandal coverage, but they don't remember the details. Most people in the millennial generation don't remember it at all. People older than me just refuse to discuss it. To my knowledge, Boys Town, a Catholic nonprofit organization, has never issued a statement about its alleged implication in the scandal. Officially, only one Boys Town employee was involved in the scandal, and not the organization itself. But given the Catholic Church's long history of covering up child sex abuse within the church, obviously, we talked about this, I've always wondered if there was more involvement in a single Boys Town employee luring children off campus. Yes, definitely. I've heard murmurs that the child sex trafficking ring uncovered in the Franklin scandal was much larger and involved children and influential people in other Midwestern states, including Iowa and Missouri. I just wanted to read that email to show that, like, obviously, this is somebody that was actually at a local paper and was being told, don't look into this. Don't look into this, over and over and over. And then the aspect of the airport, the private airport being used, I mean, I guarantee that's what happened.
For sure.
So as they mentioned in their email, even the third season of True Detective mentioned the sex ring known as Franklin. And even in 2019, the goddamn Omaha World Herald was making sure to mention repeatedly, I read the article, that the Franklin scandal had been debunked, was a hoax, etc., etc., etc. That alone is enough to discredit the entire paper altogether. Go fuck yourself, you child rape apologist pieces of shit.
So I wanted to just, at the end of this episode here, we're getting to the end. I did want to talk about an interview that Nick Bryant, the author of that book that we were talking about with the Finders, an interview that he had done. He said, regarding Epstein, that book is a template for what is happening now and how high up it goes. A major parallel between the two stories is that Larry King, who was one of the primary pimps of this pedophile network I wrote about, and Jeffrey Epstein were both flying children interstate. They had both done it with impunity for a number of years, and in both instances you have officials who were unwilling to back down. In Epstein, you had the Palm Beach Police Department that was unwilling to back down, and in Larry King, you had the Nebraska Senate that was unwilling to back down. Epstein had an island, and I'm sure he had these parties also at his place in Manhattan and elsewhere, and there were hidden cameras. In this particular venue in Washington, D.C., where the Nebraska victims were trafficked, there were also hidden cameras, which we talked about. The individual who owned the house in Washington, D.C., he had intelligence affiliations. We're seeing with Epstein that he also had alleged intelligence connections. King and Epstein collected children in the same type of fashion. King would have kids conscript other kids, just like Epstein would have kids conscript other kids. In both cases, the victims were threatened and hassled. Both Jeffrey Epstein and Larry King had lavish lifestyles, but there wasn't an obvious explanation for their wealth, and both were prominently associated with power brokers of the highest order.
Sorry, in this very article that you're talking about, I believe, it was written in January of this year, 2020, the shit show that it is. Nick Bryant, he sat down to speak with the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Disassociation, and he spoke about the physical abuse that he endured from his stepfather when he was 12 and how that caused him to run away, and how he knew that if someone like Jeffrey Epstein or Craig Spence, the DC piece of shit, had intersected with him at the time, that he would have been very vulnerable, just like these children were. This life experience is what helped shape his interest as he got older, and are part of the reason that he wrote his book on the Franklin scandal. He says it was far from a good career move because it
Sure it was.
Wasn't. Yeah. But that he felt it was too evil to ignore, but he says it was one of the worst career moves he's ever made. He said, but still, he would never have changed it. He said publishers were completely uninterested in the story, and after pitching to a few editors and publishers, they began to deem him a crazy conspiracy theorist because some fuckwads just can't accept that the world isn't black and white, and that there are terrible, awful, heinous crimes being committed by powerful people on a daily basis. Accept it. It's true. He spent a lot of time trying to track down survivors of this pedo ring, and in the end, he found 8 that would talk to him. He said that in the end, there were many powerful names that he could not even begin to mention in the book, as the survivors had led rough lives, and putting them up against some of the most powerful people in the world, making allegations of abuse just wouldn't sit well with many people. Like we've talked about, their abusers did this on purpose. They abuse their victims so badly, it inevitably compromises their credibility. And that is a tragic ending to this story that we're going to stop talking about for now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the end of Franklin Part 3. Hopefully it was a good recap and you got a little bit more information about what happened to all these people afterwards. And then you can now see the connections to other well-known sex trafficking rings that clearly, this is, I mean, I don't know how many times I'd say it. This clearly is fucking true. It's true. It happened. And the worst part is that we'll never know, probably. And same thing with Epstein and probably just in general. Will we ever know the
true extent to which it goes?
Exactly. The extent to which who is involved in this stuff. Like, who is it? Is it everybody?
I mean, even with Epstein, the royal family is involved.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
great.
But that's the other thing that I think was maybe Bohemian Grove, where I talked about how in the UK they had this exact same scandal where there were high-powered government officials and otherwise high-powered people who were involved in a drug and sex trafficking ring with children. So it's like, oh, that happens there, it happens here. Somehow we're just in such denial that it's actually true. But like I said, it's fucking true.
Right.
And anyway.
All right, y'all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We love you. Have a great life.
Have a great everything. Creep it real.